Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the June 27th, 2023 Board of Adjustment meeting. Ms. Recker will
Recording
be
in
seated
progress.
Excuse me?
Apologies. That was the Zoom meeting.
It said recording in progress.
Oh, okay, then we'll continue. Ms. Record will be sitting in as our alternate for the entire meeting tonight. For presentation, applicants are granted 15 minutes to present their project. If you anticipate needing more time, please ask at the beginning of the presentation and the board will consider your request. For people speaking to, for, or against, about 5 minutes would be hoped for. Okay, thank you. The first item of business is item A. The request of JJCM Realty LLC and Top Notch Properties owners for property located at 232 South Street, whereas relief is needed to construct a 12 by 20 garage, which requires the following. A variance from section 10.521 to A, permitted building coverage of 26% where 20% is permitted, and B, permit a side setback of 1.5 feet where 10 feet is required, and 2, a variance from section 10.571 to permit an accessory structure in the front yard. Said property is located on Assessor Map 111, Lot 2, and lies within the single residence and historic district. Is there anyone to speak to this? Please come forward. Tell us who you are and your address.
Like my home address?
Please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gary Bolio, and I'm a manager of the LLC. And my home address is 9 Pasture Lane, Bedford, New Hampshire. So, what you see on the board there is what we're going for. We're trying to enact a small 12 by 20 structure that will be shown, let's see, one of those will show the actual, yeah, there it is, the yellow portion. Am I?
You have to take a mic with you if you're going over there.
Oh, good. Will this one go with me?
It should.
Oh, thank you.
It should come out.
It's a,
So this yellow portion is the 12 by 20 garage, which will be built. It was designed and already came before the Historical Commission for that kind of clarification, and they liked the design. I'm sure there's notes there somewhere to that effect. But it's the same color, same texture, same trim, same roof pitch to match the existing house. So from that standpoint, even the hardware will be the same on the doors, the light, etc. I had originally presented to Nick, just having it flush. He came back to me saying that it'd be more period looking if we pushed it back. And he actually, this drawing is basically what he sent back to me, and then we just sent it back to the architect, and they redid this. So this is kind of where Nick placed it, and they were good with it at the last meeting. Yeah. So, whoa. Sorry about that. That was the stand. So I'll just kind of put that out of the way for now. So that's kind of where it's at. I had talked to a couple of my neighbors. They're in presence tonight, trying to figure out what to do because there's some arborvitaes along this side right here. And in respect,
take the mic up, please.
in respect to, it's our neighbors to the left. I think it's 220. I'm not certain, South Street, but they're also in progress remodeling their home, and they've got things going on there. So I've seen them a few times out. Now we've got not really friendly, but talking enough where we're communicating over common things that might affect us both. So the last conversation I had recently was we got some arborvitaes here, and this is the property. What's kind of come up, and it just came up to me recently when I saw the plot plan blown up. You've got, there's the property line. This is certified as-built done by Ambit. Do we all know who Ambit Engineering is here in town? Yes. They've been before you a couple of times, reputable, I assume, and we've used them on other things in Portsmouth. And here's their their lot line, and they show the as-built, and it shows these arborvitaes in question that we're afraid of ruining are actually probably about half on our property now. And if you take their mulch bed that's about a foot or two, it's literally probably 3 feet on our side of the property already.
Touch the screen.
Thank you. I won't touch it. Thank you very much for that. So I was prepared,
Could you please
knowing
put
that
that-
would come up tonight, probably a little objection,
The mic,
is that
sorry, you might
I-
expect more from it, but it's not doing a great job, so please keep it up there.
Okay, thank you. I'm prepared to, make an agreement with the abutter, because, this happens all the time, I'm sure, with variances, people are affected, the neighbors. But the arborvitae's here, they're doing for, privacy, which is nice. But I just recently put about 15 of those, I took some pine tree down in my personal house in Bedford that were getting affected by the last couple of storms, so I put like 15 arborvitae's, and I had them done by a professional nursery out of Bedford area. And they've planted them like 5 feet apart, because anybody familiar with arborvitae's, they kind of grow about a foot a year, and they'll grow anywhere from 12 to 20 to 30 feet tall, and they grow about a foot wide a year. And, my fear is, I'm thinking I'll work with these people to, preserve these arborvitae's, but my fear is a year or two, right now they're probably about 3 feet wide, and they're planted about a foot apart, so they're growing into each other. 3 or 4 of them are kind of dead right now. I took pictures of them. They're brown and wilted because they're not getting sunlight, but that's another story. Okay, so the point is, if I damaged anything here doing the site work on this edge with a footing, for example, I would make an agreement that I would repair in kind, replace. My broker's telling me, who is sitting right here in the front row, from Keller Williams, he's telling me, you don't have to do that. He pulled up the law, said anything overhanging your boundary, you can just cut off. So I literally, if I could show you pictures, these last 3 or 4 are almost, if that barn, their building is on the property line, well, the last 3 or 4 arborvitae's are probably, if you look for the property line, probably 3 feet fully on mine with a mulch bed, another 2 feet. I literally could go in there and, by law, just chop them off. They'd have bare trees on one side, and I'd have my room on my others. And their mulch beds, which is sloping about a foot high, well into my property, a good 2 or 3 feet, definitely into my property. But I'm not that kind of a neighbor. I'll work in saving them with them. But, my fear is I plant them, put them back where they are, and then in 2 years, as they grow 2 or 3 or 4 feet like they're supposed to, 5 feet wide, it's going to be growing into my garage, and I'll be having the same.
I'm going to ask you to come back to what we're here to decide tonight.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Well, that's kind of my whole presentation is really, what we see there, looking for relief, to about 18 inches. I could I have another couple feet. I could go a little further.
Yeah.
Away from the property line, need be, but it's still within the, still outside of the 10-foot purview.
Okay. Do you have more you want to tell us?
Pardon me?
Would you like to speak to the conditions of approval?
On, for the hardship and those
Yes,
things?
yes.
I don't,
And if you do, would you come back? It might be easier
Okay.
for you.
okay. I think it's in keeping with the theme and the spirit of the rule allowing it, where probably about every other home in the area does have a garage, whether they're 10 feet back, behind the house. It's kind of, whatever works. It's kind of that eclectic neighborhood, very charming. A lot of the properties already exceed, I think when I submitted my package, I had like 4 or 5 immediate neighboring homes, which exceeded the lot coverage, some by somewhere 40%. So we're going from 23 currently to 26, which we were here earlier when Tim Lewis got us from 20 to 23 to put the decks on the back or whatever we did the first time around. Yeah. So it's in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance in the neighborhood. I think the big thing is, is there any hardship involved here? And I don't think the hardship would be that in today's with narrow lots like this, there is no place to put a garage. I mean, if I can't put it in the front, if I put it in the back, there's wetland. I mean, I wouldn't mind putting it behind, like I think one of my neighbors has, there's probably a little further back, but you go through the conservation board, you get more relief, but I don't have that relief right now. Took a while to get to this point here, and I've got that kind of established. And I think, to use the words of when Nick talked to me, he says, it's what we designed here is keeping in the character. It doesn't change the character or the feeling of the neighborhood. It does not diminish values of anybody around us. It does not cause harm. In fact, it does, I think the benefit, the town doesn't gain more benefit denying it than we gain by getting it, I guess, is the bottom line, in your terms,
Okay.
in legalese.
Does anybody have questions for the applicant?
I do.
So I have a few questions. I have 3 questions, actually. One, is the lot in back owned in common between the 2 units?
It's
The
common,
land-
it's common area, correct.
It's
Yeah,
common
that's-
area.
yeah, common area,
Okay.
yeah.
And why can't you push the garage back so that it's equal with your neighbors?
On the, there have, like a work office garage, if you would, that they went through the conservation board to get that. And again, that would kind of ruin the backyard to a degree. And if we're selling it as condominiums with an equal access to that backyard, all of a sudden now you've got a skew to the left. It's not an imperfect, it's an imperfect world doing it that way.
Okay, so my last question is, where on the property are your wetlands? I can't quite figure it out.
The wetlands aren't on the property. We are, the back of our porches, again, maybe I'll try to see if they show them. The back of our decks here, right there, are about 3 feet over the wetland setback. That's why we had to go to Conservation Board the last time, get a relief from that to build in here. The wetland boundary is actually about here, and from here to there was 75 feet to the wetland boundary, the buffer, if you call it. So we don't have any wetland on the property. It starts just off our property.
And you don't have, you're just outside of the buffer?
Yes. Yes, we're about 4 feet. Yeah, the buffer starts right at the back of the house, so if we keep it, our buffer, this is in a variance right here, an exception. This, right to the house is the line. So Nick was keeping it in front of that line, and as our architects, we looked at all the setbacks. That was where it didn't need any more board approval.
Okay. Another question? Thank you. Mr. Rayon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to understand the ownership. So on our sheet 11, it's the condominium site plan. So, and it describes over in the little notes on the left-hand side, this is a condominium association. Who owns each of the units? Do you own both units?
Correct at this time, yes. As the developer, owner, yes.
Okay, so so you are the sole owner. There's no other permissions that are needed. You, at this point in time, are in fact the condo association.
Correct.
Okay. I am also very confused about these wetlands. What piece of water are you within 100 feet of? Because when I looked at this, there doesn't seem to be any water anywhere near you.
Well, well, there's no standing water. It does get a little, when there's melting, there was a little, swamp back there a little bit, I noticed in the spring, but not, it's, I guess, as engineers would call it, and architects call it a hydric B, type B soil, where it feeds certain vegetation, doesn't really foster wildlife, but, maybe frogs and different germs or bacteria or insects can live in a moist soil.
So who has told you that you are in a wetlands buffer?
That was done by the engineers and architects. It's on a map. We must have a. Yeah, City of Portsmouth wetland buffer. I have stakes in my backyard from the City of Portsmouth.
Okay, I guess.
I will say that if you take that walk from the back of Little Harbor out onto Marston, what street is it? Yes, it is wet. It is very, very wet behind his house.
Okay.
Yeah, not standing water perhaps, but very likely to be at any time.
Moist soil, you sink your feet in on any given day.
Okay, I'm good with that. So back in 2021, you were granted a variance to expand your building coverage to essentially 23%. As you point out, you're about 22.5%, 20% is the limit. You're now asking once again to expand on the coverage. Why did you not bring this project up back 2 years ago? Why is it coming now?
Well, because we actually assumed that it was a done design from a young developer that was, for other terms, going bankrupt. So we picked up the approved process from there. So we just ran with what was approved. And then the garages come from public sentiment with the real estate here, Keller Williams. They keep showing it, and in those neighborhoods, kind of pricey. Everybody's asking if they could have a garage. What's the likelihood? So I said, after enough asks, I said it's a real concern, a real question. People, especially people that have electric cars, I guess it's a vogue. Not my thing, but I won't speak to that point. But some people are saying a place to plug in a car, or people that have had nicer cars. These neighbors will attest. If you have a nice BMW or a nice better car, and you want a place to park it, if you're spending that kind of money in that neighborhood under today's cost, they're expecting that. Not that, so here we are.
Other
Sure.
questions, Mr. Ray?
I do, if I can
Yes,
continue.
yeah,
I
please.
apologize. So 2 years later, you want to put a garage on this side. Why is the other condo not getting a garage? And when are you coming back to ask for that garage, I guess?
We probably aren't, because we share a driveway with another attendee here this evening. It's not a shared driveway, but we've only got about 12 feet on that side. Here we have like 17 feet to start with. So we have a buffer to walk around the garage. We still have a couple feet to the other side of the garage. We'd be right on the line there. It'd be a zero, and it'd be touching the house. And we just didn't feel that was practical. To me, that wouldn't be fitting in with the neighborhood. It would be crowding her, and we decided against that. So one will buy with, and one will buy without.
Okay. And so it's on page 9 of our package. Grand variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance. One of the things you say is the HDC will work with us and address the historical architecture objection. What objection are you referring to?
Well, there was really none. I don't know if that was a typo putting in, but they just wanted to have a final draft of what we're doing for the driveway. Nick was suggesting cobblestone versus the hard packed paving that's there now.
And where are you at with the Historic District Commission? Do you have their approval at this point?
They blessed that design, and they just said, once we get through this stage, if we pass it successfully, they'll want to come back and, approve the final plan, the garage door we use, that kind of thing. Nick wanted to maybe use a barn-type door that opened this way as opposed to a pull down, so I said I'd explore those for our next meeting if it went that far.
Okay, so you don't have an approval from them, but you have some preliminary consultation that was favorable?
Correct, totally favorable.
Okay. And then one of the variances you're looking for is to put an accessory structure in the front yard, but then on page 8, page 9 again of our package, accessory structure in the front yard, you talk to it, but then you say that really, that if you do the averaging method, you think you have 9 feet, which would not require that variance. So what, and I guess maybe planning staff can weigh in on this, what's the current situation there?
I got that, by the way, from meeting with Peter. He just said, he looked at my last variance, he said they took the common frontage distance of the surrounding homes, determined the front was 9, so he crossed out variance for that 30 foot, that's 9 foot.
Okay, let's hear from Jillian.
This
Okay.
variance request is for an accessory structure in the front yard, not necessarily the setback. So since it's located within that 30-foot front yard, that's the variance request.
Okay. All right. Guess I kind of understand that logic. And then you talked to, and granted the variance will, and you've said it in your narrative as well, you said that most of your neighbors have garages. I guess when I looked around the neighborhood, I saw a smattering. Obviously, your most closest abutter has a garage that looks pretty old, was built up against the property line. looking around the rest of the neighborhood, I didn't really see a lot of properties that had garages or ones that were on the property line. I guess, do you have like a specific list of the properties that you've identified?
Recent neighbors, butters, and
Both sides immediately have garages on both sides of me and right across the street.
Sure. You're using the term neighborhood, I guess in the larger neighborhood, what are you seeing for?
Probably
Are there-
50% have them. And
Okay.
immediately,
But you don't have like specific locations or anything along those lines that you could identify for us?
no,
Okay,
no.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, then would you like your realtor to speak? I'm getting faces.
I was just going to comment on the two immediate neighbors.
No. If you would like to come up, introduce yourself, tell us a little about you, and then you can talk.
Hi, I'm Matt Bolio. I work with Keller Williams here in town, representing the property as the brokerage representation. We've got a lot of feedback, of course, for people in that neighborhood, being in the South End, kind of that single-family feel that the garage component is crucial. And when they walk the property and they see the left neighbor has a garage much closer to the wetland buffer, and then, of course, the right neighbor has a garage with a large addition that they approved a few years ago with a drive-around, wrap-around, I think, two-car garage that sets back further than our decks close to the buffer as well. Same exact setbacks, buffer requirements. The neighbor directly across the street as well had a garage created somewhat set back from the road, so it was in like kind of what we're trying to do here. And we've had people walk through the property that even made comments that grew up on the street or lived on the street that said, that house didn't have a garage before. That was a recent, last couple of years remodel and extension of the home. So you literally are in a triangle surrounded by 3 properties that all have garages. So the immediate neighbors and the immediate neighborhood definitely flows in contacts, and that's what I'm getting from every broker, every buyer that comes in from in-state, out-of-state, you name it. So it definitely flows within character of the neighborhood. That's all I wanted to
All
add.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this proposal? In favor. Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this proposal?
Hello, everyone. Where's our little microphone?
He's got it.
Thanks.
Use the
Pretty good
tall
one,
one.
should you?
I can use this one too? Great. My name is Christina Logan. I live next to this property at 220 South Street.
And I'm Michael Graff, also 220 South Street. So we are the direct abutters who are most affected by this application. I'm also an architect, licensed architect and contractor, and this is my profession. So I'm also a longtime Portsmouth area resident, and I know Portsmouth quite well. Just to clarify a few things, we don't have a garage. The building adjacent is Christina's studio. We did go in front of all 3 boards to get our application completed for that job. I've told the applicant that I could get behind this project. I don't object to a single-car garage in the south end, but the problem with this application is that the location is incorrect. It's too close to the street, and it's also too close to our property line. The arborvitae that have been discussed would have to be removed to do the construction. I don't know if you've had the chance to see the site, but it's been sort of unprofessionally staked, the corners of where they'd like to locate the garage, and it's right up against the arborvitaes that were put in when the prior owner of this property lived there, and we collectively put that hedgerow in. So it's now mature, and they add a lot to both properties. So I talked to the applicant about moving the building back so that it's roughly in the same location as Christina's studio. And he stated that he did not want to go in front of conservation and get relief. And I said, well, you have precedent there. We got relief for a similar type of building, and it shouldn't be a problem. But we're dealing with a situation where it's a developer property, and they just want to do whatever they can to sell it. So they don't really have what we feel are the interests of the neighborhood in mind. Clarification on the other garages in the neighborhood, there are not that many garages in our neighborhood. There is one across the street. It's set back so that the door of the garage is back beyond the main house. Our neighbor on the other side of the applicant's property, her garage is in the very back of the house. You can't see them from South Street. This garage, the way it's staked and located, it's not parallel to the house. It's parallel to the lot line. So it's about a little over 4 feet at one end from the house and a little over 6 feet. Then this is based on the staking, which, needs to be done professionally. But based on what's there staked in the ground, it's at this odd skew to the main house. But the bigger problem is that it's just too close, both to South Street and to the property line. Thank you.
Thank you. Bud? Is there anyone else to speak in opposition? Please come up.
Hello, I'm Lori Kennedy. I live at 244 South Street. That was a recent build in 2017 and 2018. I went through all 3 boards to do what I did with Nick on my side about the 2-car garage, which is actually on below level. I went for a garage versus more house. So it was very purposeful in what I did, and you cannot see it from the road. They are right on my lot line. As far as the wetlands go, I did have to get a variance, but it was for like 2 feet for one corner of my garage. And my property had to be landscaped in that it was abutting the wetlands. I made sure that I have the abutter, bayberry bushes and whatever else in that area so that it is still part of the wildlife. My main grievance is I will not be able to see it from my house. It is very close to the lot line. If they sell it as 2 units, which is what they're approaching to do, right on my lot line, where one car has already been damaged by the work that was there is not enough room for 2 cars. So there seems to be a little bit of misinformation about how many cars can fit on that property. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Is there anyone to speak to?
Could
I'm
I-
sorry, did you have a
could-
question?
could I get
I'm sorry,
clarification
Miss-
from the
Of
speaker?
course, would you please come up again?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there was some discussion about a shared driveway. Do you share a driveway with the applicant for the property next door?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I had to get a variance in order to do right of way to get into my garage by 1.5 feet with the previous owner, which all went through. So I have 1.5 feet of driveway so I can make the curve to go into my garage, but it's on his property, but not part of his parking situation.
Okay.
And that is pervious.
So there is like something that's placed on the record with the Registry of
absolutely.
Deeds saying that there is you have a
It's a right of way.
right of way there.
It's 1.5
Okay. All
feet.
Okay.
right. Thank you.
Anyone to speak to, for, or against? Yes.
Hey guys, Matt Bolio again, Keller Williams here in town. So just to kind of comment on some of the questions. So the property itself, we're getting a lot of interest too, not just from a condo standpoint, but a single family in line with the neighborhood as discussed. And someone could occupy and purchase the property in its totality, as we own in its totality. And therefore the garage and that layout as well is very attractive to the yard and to have a garage structure for that residence, fitting to kind of what they spoke about. Additionally, what we're seeing is a lot of people are just showcasing that there's an opportunity here that if they had the garage, they'd love to be in that neighborhood. And it is a hardship that we're getting a lot of pushback that without it, due to the surrounding neighbors having a garage-like structure or a garage, that, is that something they'd be able to do at some point? And to also comment, I've been a resident in Portsmouth for many years. I've worked in town many years as well. And we've also done other projects here in town that we've spent years working with the HDC, the ZBA, and approval processes. So we're not just in here one night and out the next. We're as much residents here really trying to create a product like we did on 232 Court Street, the Pumpkin House in town. So I just wanted to put reference to that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak to, for, or against? Okay. The public hearing is closed. What would we like to do? Anyone?
I guess I would
Mr.
just,
Mattson.
yeah, my initial comment from reviewing this, then after hearing the applicant and neighbors, it's still, yeah, it seems odd to me that there's only one garage being proposed. The actual proposal, I don't think is that, it's a little aggressive, but it's not beyond something I could get on board with, but both that they've already been before the board within the past few years, and then there's this, and then it does seem weird that there's no garage on the other side. I guess I'm on the fence about the hardship and whether or not there's actual hardship. So.
Anybody else? Yes, Ms. Margerson.
So I feel a little conflicted as well, and a garage is an appropriate and allowed accessory use to a residential building. I think, I take the comment seriously that, there was a desire not to go before the Conservation Commission. I think an argument could be made that bringing a building completely out of the wetlands buffer is also a good thing. I do have concerns about them coming back 2 years later. I realize it was a different builder. I still have concerns about the lot on Unit 2. So I'm just a little bit conflicted on this.
Mr. Rio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the plus side, I do think that the applicant is asking for a 12 by 20 garage. That is modest. You can maybe get down to a 10 by 18 if you got like a truly tiny car and a little electric car, but 12 by 20 is probably the smallest that you're going to get. It is, it's got the gable roof, but 14 feet high. In the sense of what they're proposing for the size, I don't think it's terribly bad. That said, they are adding in the additional need for relief because it's in the front yard. So it's relatively close to they're in a single residence neighborhood, which has like a large front yard. Setback requirement, what we define as the front yard for this property. Understand that there is a lot of room out towards the back. I think the neighboring property, is a little bit more conflicted from an allowable space standpoint. So that kind of drove their garage, which is, larger than what their large garage studio, whatever that is. It is larger than what this particular applicant is asking for. At the same point in time, 1.5 feet when they is very tight. It really is trying to squeeze this in here. When we asked about hardship, really what's coming back is, discussion about an economic hardship. Our criteria here is what is the unique nature of this property that says that they have something that no one else has or very few other properties have, that says that our zoning ordinance, which says you shouldn't be able to build anything within 10 feet of the property line, should be overlooked. And I'm just not hearing anything from a hardship standpoint that says that we should overlook it. And also in terms of the neighborhood, I know they're making the argument that there is immediate properties around them that have garages. Sounds like there's some variation. Yes, admittedly, the closest neighbor has a garage/studio that is very close to the property line. Others seem less close to the property lines. When I looked through the neighborhood, I tried to look to see what else there was I found very few garages. I found a lot of properties where people, as they expect to do in the south end, are parking in a pretty small patch of gravel or dirt, or on rare occasions of pavement, to have a car that's off the street. In some cases, that even isn't available because of the nature of this very, very old neighborhood. So understand the economic desire by the applicant to go and create a garage. I applaud them that it is somewhat modest in their request, but again, it's just so close to the property line. Just on the whole, it's telling me that there's just not enough there to meet our criteria for approval. That's my thought. Over.
Anybody else? Would anyone like to make a motion? No, the public hearing is closed. All right, one more comment then. I don't think I could approve this project because while I understand there are narrow lots and it's hard not to build close to a lot line in the south end, and a garage is not a big ask, but I don't want to go to the Conservation Commission is not really a hardship. I think that relief should be sought before ours. So that's how I'm looking at this. No, you may not.
Madam Chair, if I may, I will make a motion to deny the applicant's request.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, who?
Mr. Manoff.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mann. All right, thank you. So to satisfy this board, you need to meet all of the variance criteria that we have. However, if you fail on any one of them, this board can't grant that. So I do think that there's two aspects to this that I think it's failing on. The first is granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. So I do think this has to do with the nature of the neighborhood. The garage in the location that the applicant is asking for is not something that I see a lot of in the rest of the neighborhood from what I did for a review. The applicant has provided no evidence specific to other properties that would have a similar look and feel to the one that they are trying to create. So in that sense, I think that there is, there is still interest in the zoning ordinance to say, you know what, we still, even in this tight neighborhood with these types of lots, we still want to have more than just what we're calling a 1.5 foot. Typically we round down to the nearest foot, but so 1 to 1.5 foot setback in the location that's being asked for here. In addition, it also, the positioning that the applicant is asking for requires an additional relief from the front yard requirement, which could be, also alleviated by repositioning it on the lot. So with that, I think that it is contrary to the public interest. And then to the unnecessary hardship, again, the applicant has brought up some economic hardships associated with it, and that, I'm sure that there are lots of people who are very interested in having a garage. I lived without one in Portsmouth for many, many years. I do treasure the one that I now have, but I had to move to get that. And it's just part of the nature of living in the South End. I don't hear anything related to, the unique characteristics of this property. A little bit on the fact that there is some wetlands, but we have seen some other examples where, again, it sounds like that they are in the 100-foot buffer. There is some potential leniency there that other neighboring properties have gotten in the past to be able to build in another location that would provide further setback from the property, would eliminate the need for that front variance request, front yard variance request. So with that, I think it's failing on those two criteria, and therefore I should not be approved.
Does the second have anything to add?
I agree with what Mr. Riome's reasoning is. Specifically, I don't see the hardship. There is no obligation that you get a garage. I don't have a garage, at least one I can park my car in. And I find it odd you have a two-family property and you're only looking for a single-car garage. And I suspect that at some point in time, as David's pointed out, they'll be back. So for that reason, I will support the application. I will support Mr. Rayom's motion.
Okay. Is there any further discussion before we take a vote? Okay. The motion is to deny. A yes vote denies the project. Okay. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mantle?
Yes.
Ms. Margison?
Yes.
Mr. Rayom?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. You are denied.
Kind of weird they can be right on the property line, but mine's too close. The compass blows on
We're not listening.
Why would you? Thank you.
Well, in the proper time.
Thank you very much.
6, so is that 5-1? Jody vote yes? Jody, did you vote yes?
I did vote yes.
Okay. I always keep score.
Thank you. Sorry, technical problem. Item B, the request of Sarnia Properties, Inc., care of CP Management, Inc., owners, for property located at 933 U.S. Route 1 bypass, whereas special exception is needed to allow a health club greater than 2,000 square feet, GFA, which requires the following. 1, special exception from section 10.440, use number 4.42, to allow a health club where the use is permitted by special exception. Said property is located on Assessor Map 142, Lot 37, and lies within the Business and Highway Noise Overlay District. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Attorney John Boson. I represent the applicant. With me this evening is Craig Annis. He is a Portsmouth resident, also the owner of the club. It's Craig, and he's with his daughter Dalen, who is the manager of the clubs. Vanguard has existed in Portsmouth. It's a gym. They've been on Rains Avenue for over 20 years. In addition to this location, there are 6 other locations. 5 other. The plan now is to relocate the Rains Ave gym to the former Portsmouth Paper Company building on the bypass. For those of you that don't know, the Vanguard Key Club is a high-end model. It's a low-density, unstaffed fitness facility. It doesn't hold any fitness classes, so the traffic in the club is not concentrated, but rather spread out over the entire day. The property on the bypass is in the Business B zoning district, the purpose of which is to provide for a mix of retail, commercial, and residential uses. Health clubs exceeding 2,000 square feet in gross floor area are permitted in the business zone by special exception. So with that background, I'd like to go through the special exception criteria and answer any questions you may have. First, the proposed use, a health club, is permitted within this district by special exception. Second, the proposed use will pose no hazard to the public or adjacent properties on account of potential fire, explosion, or release of toxic materials. In fact, no explosives, toxic materials, or other accelerants of any type are involved in the operation of this club, so none will be stored on site. Third, there'll be no detriment to property values in the vicinity or change in the essential characteristics of the area, including residential neighborhoods or businesses or industrial districts on account of the location or scale of buildings or other structures, parking areas, access ways, odor, smoke, gas, dust, or other pollutant, noise, glare, heat, vibration, or the unsightly outdoor storage of equipment, vehicles, or other materials. This particular building, the structure, and the parking areas, the access ways have existed since 1968. There is no new construction or site disturbance being proposed in this application, so the club is not going to create any odor, smoke, gas, dust, pollutants, noise, glare, heat, or vibrations. There'll be no outdoor storage of any equipment associated with this particular use. Fourth, there'll be no creation of a traffic safety hazard or substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity. The existing use is comprised of an industrial, warehouse, retail, and office use. The applicant's operation is geared towards specialized clientele. It doesn't generate a significant amount of traffic, and a conditional use permit relating to the parking lot on this site is currently before the planning board. Fifth, there'll be no excessive demand on municipal services, including but not limited to water, sewer, waste disposal, police, fire protection, and schools. In fact, none of these services are going to be implicated at all with this proposal. And finally, the project will result in no significant increase in stormwater runoff onto adjacent streets or properties. And that's because there's no change to the existing building or the impervious surfaces. So what I think is a pretty straightforward application. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Other questions? Mr. Ram?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at your plan here, hold on, just trying to resize my screen. It's not like the good old days with paper. So on page 30 of our packet, it's the drawing C3 proposed parking plan. So I'm trying to understand what portion of the building is your applicant using? So there's a sort of gold colored dashed lines that says changed updated use area. Is that the portion of the building that your client is proposing to use?
Are you referring to this area right here?
No, there's a little to your right. There's two dashed lines sort of in the middle of the
This area right
building.
here.
Yeah, there you go. And it says change updated use area.
Sorry, if you're.
This is Craig Annis. Craig,
Okay, you'll introduce him.
he was going
Are you just pointing?
Don't touch anything.
Don't touch.
to,
Don't talk.
Yeah, and don't talk. No, I'm sorry, if you're going to,
Yeah.
you need a mic if you're going to say anything. So come up and tell us who you are, and you'll be official.
Hi, Craig Annis, owner of Vanguard Key Club.
Okay, now.
So you're missing one dotted gold line here from this. This was designed as the parking plan, but these were there are multiple units in here. The gold line that's missing is the one that roughly about here that runs straight back. So the space we're talking about is really essentially a triangle with a long neck, okay, which has a shared loading dock. But this is from here over is kind of what we're talking about relocating into.
Okay, so your next page down, page 31 of our packet is drawing C1.
I think that's a better.
I'm guessing that's showing, see, this is very unclear, so I guess that's showing you're in what is being
Twisted.
identified here as Unit 5.
Right.
Is
So
that
this
correct?
this is the missing dotted line if you flip this. So this is now the space.
Okay.
The parking lot on this side.
So that strip that we were seeing on the previous drawing has nothing to do with your application? You are not?
That's just showing parking because we already went before TAC on the parking thing and they gave us a unanimous approval.
Okay.
So
it is confusing.
And then there's a little sub-drawing in a bunch of dash lines here that talks about a mezzanine, steel gate, one floor. Is that part of your?
it will be, but we're not going to use it for the gym. We're gonna our proposal, when we talk with the architects, is we're going to cut it off at about this point, but the landlord wants me to rent the whole thing.
Okay.
So this will just be warehouse space that we can then always sub out to somebody that needs 3,000 square feet of warehouse space.
Okay, and then relative to your parking, which is one of our criteria for this application, in part, I understand that you are going for conditional use permit before the planning board, and then you have sort of like a parking calculation that's up in the corner of the sheet C3 on page 30 of our packet. Could you explain what the parking situation is and what you are presently before the planning board for, and what the status is of that application for the planning
Right.
board?
So with the additional tenants, you want to take it? Or want me to just?
Well, there's 83 spots that are available. The ordinance requires 114. We had a pretty favorable meeting before TAC. They're going to send it to the planning board July 20th. We have every reason to believe we'll receive the conditional use permit, but that is an outstanding permit that we need to obtain.
Okay.
But we think there's more than adequate parking here. One of the unique things about Vanguard is that because there's no classes, we don't have an influx of people at the same time. So the busiest time in the gym is probably between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. And at that time,
PM.
Mr. Menace would, PM,
PM.
sorry, would tell you that you might have 20 people at a time. So there's plenty of parking on site.
Thank you.
I mean, we've been operating for over 20 years downtown on Rains Ave, where there's going to be a new development eventually. So we got to kind of plan ahead where we're going to go once they buy me out of my lease. And we've been surviving with 40 spaces and sharing it with Barrio and everybody else that wants to have a parking lot down in that section of town and wander off. So I think that's where TAC was kind of like, okay, you've got the type of business that operates without a huge influx of cars. We're not at Planet Fitness. We don't have classes. Therefore, people roll in and out 24/7, 365. I mean, just whenever they want to go in.
I'm sorry if I may continue, Madam Chair. So again, going to our criteria about traffic, so what, with that particular unit number 5, what are the entry points into that unit? Because it's not clear to me from any of the drawings.
It's off Emery, which is right across from the what's going to be the Motorbikes Plus, the old CED electrical
Okay.
property. So that's going to be the road in. So
So is it more likely then that most of your clientele will be entering from the Emery Central Avenue side?
I suspect. I mean, they could park at the lower parking lot and then walk up, and nobody wants to walk anymore, even if they go into a gym.
Yeah. So there is no entrance on the like the gas station that would
There is
building.
not an entrance directly for us. Correct.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So you're-
But down on the other side, right as Cuts, as you turn on to Cuts, there's a lower parking lot, and there's a ramp and a staircase up to this end of the building.
okay.
So people could conceivably park down there and walk up to what would be our entrance. It just didn't seem to make a lot of sense for the property. You have a lot of congestion in one area when you could spread it out.
Okay. And then one final question. What's driving the 114 spaces? Who are the other current tenants in the building that require that many spaces?
Did they include that list on the same one that TAC had? Or?
The only calculation you have is for 82 spaces, but as Attorney Boson has said, the staff memo says 114 spaces. So I'm presuming someone has a calculation somewhere that says that that's...
that went to TAC for sure. There's a chart, and basically we just went through the existing tenants. We went through what their uses are, and we did the city math, and it said you got to have 113 or 114, and this property has 83.
I think it's 8. I count 8 office spaces in there, and there's 2. Apparently, there are 2 apartments.
No, that's Rains Ave.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's Rains Ave, and we put that in as a comparison to what we currently are dealing with far less spaces and all the other subtenants that are in the building. So that's where that number came from. But I know you got to pick a number, right? You got to say it's 1 space per 250 square feet or whatever. We're just not the model that has 1 person per 250 square feet. The way that we operate.
That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you for your patience.
Mr. Mattson?
Yeah, my question, which was just answered, was how many are currently at Rains Ave, and you said 40-something.
We've got about 41 spaces, and we've survived with, so there's 41 spaces, but we've got the 10,000 square foot, 12,000 square foot gym, 2 apartments, some offices upstairs that we sublease to, and we're fighting with the neighbors who like to park in our parking lot and go eat tacos. So, yeah, that's, I mean, and it's where, and there's usually always a space, so that's, and, with our busy times being after people are typically not working. So the offices that are there, they're out at 5. That's when our people start rolling in. It's just, sort of that, just kind of made sense.
I do have the answer to your question, Mr. Rayom. There's currently 3 office spaces on the property. There's a storage space, 3,000 square feet of storage space. There's also warehouse space for craft beer, and there's a small gym on site already.
Not that
It's
small,
a
he's 9,000.
personal
9,000,
training.
yeah. Like a
personal-
CrossFit kind of facility.
personal training
about 9,000
facility.
square feet.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you.
And nobody asked about our rates.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Anyone who'd like to speak to, for, or against? Okay. Public hearing is closed. And it is back to us. Sorry, go.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the special exception.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, you have a second from Ms. Record, so
Okay. So the standards as provided by this ordinance for the particular use of this health club is permitted by special exception, for number 1. For number 2, no hazard to the public or adjacent property on account of potential fire, explosion, or release of toxic chemicals. This isn't a concern with the health club, and no external changes. No detriment to property values. Number 3, no detriment to property values in the vicinity or change in the essential characteristics. of any area, including residential neighborhoods or business and industrial districts, on account of the location or scale of buildings and other structures, parking areas, access ways, odor, smoke, gas, dust, or other pollutant, noise, glare, heat, vibration, or unsightly outdoor storage of equipment, vehicles, or other materials. Again, this won't be a problem here where there's no external changes and it's a health club. Number 4, no creation of a traffic safety hazard or a substantial increase in the level of traffic congestion in the vicinity. This is a location which will have almost twice the parking of the location that the business has been operating from for over 20 years. And it's a off-peak hours for traffic, so that should be fine, and TAC approved it. Number 5, no excessive demand on municipal services, including but not limited to water, sewer, waste disposal, police, and fire protection in schools, which, again, this shouldn't be a problem for this health club, which is allowed by special exception. And number 6, no significant increase of stormwater runoff onto adjacent property or streets, and this won't be an issue because there's no external changes.
You have anything to add, Ms. Record?
No, thank you.
Right, any discussion before we vote? Okay, so the motion, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Rain.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting the motion. I did ask a lot of questions. I thought some of the aspects of the presentation were a little confusing, but I think the applicant and the applicant's attorney were able to answer most of them successfully. This really comes down to the one criteria about the traffic congestion. I do believe that the applicant has made a pretty good argument that their needs for parking are probably out of synchronicity with the other needs for the other uses within the building, i.e. that their heavy traffic and parking needs are going to be outside of the times that those other users would be looking for those same types of capabilities. So with that, I support it. Obviously, they still have to go through the planning board, and I trust the planning board process. Since they took parking away from this board and converted it into a conditional use permit, that they will look at that accordingly and address it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the vote, Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
Yes.
Ms. Margison?
Yes.
Mr. Rahum?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So you are approved. Okay. Item C on the agenda is the request of Ashley J. Brown and Lisa F. Brown, Living Trust owners, for property located at 176 Orchard Street. Whereas relief is needed to construct an addition and deck to the rear of the existing structure and rebuild the existing rear staircase, which requires the following. 1, variance from section 10.521 to allow 27% building coverage where 25% is allowed. And 2, a variance from section 10.321 to allow a non-conforming building or structure to be extended, reconstructed, or enlarged without conforming to the requirements of the ordinance. Said property is located on Assessor Map 149, Lot 41, and lies within the General Residence A District.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Attorney John Bosa, and I represent the applicants. With me tonight, representing the trust itself, the applicants are Ashley Brown and Lisa Brown, and the residents of the city of Portsmouth and resided at 179 Orchard since 2007. Property's in the GRA zone, and it's non-conforming as to front yard setbacks. The house sits on what I'd call a trapezoidal-shaped lot. It's bounded on both its northern and westerly sides by the right-of-way, so technically it has no side yards. The applicants are here tonight because they'd like to add a modest 256-square-foot addition and a 234-square-foot deck to the eastern side of the existing house. The existing non-compliant front yard setbacks will remain as is. The net increase in building footprint will be approximately 240 square feet. Project requires relief from section 10.521 for lot coverage of 26.7%, where 25% is the maximum required, and from section 10.321 in order to extend or enlarge a non-conforming structure. With that background, I'd like to go through the zoning criteria that enables this board to grant the requested variances. First, granting the requested variances will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance, nor will it be contrary to the public interest. As I mentioned earlier, the existing structure and lot are already non-conforming with the front yard setback requirements, and the modest increase in building footprint resulting from this project will in no way compromise the residential characteristics of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Next, substantial justice would be done by granting the variance. In this case, there's no benefit to the public in denying the variance that is not outweighed by hardship upon the owner. The setbacks to abutting properties are fully compliant, and the existing non-conforming front yard setbacks are to remain as is. The increase in building coverage, the 240 square feet we're seeking, is very reasonable given the lot is located in the inside bend of Orchard Street, where the paved portion of the right-of-way tapers significantly, turns south, and what amounts to almost a private alley. It's worth noting that the applicants have reviewed their plans with their neighbors and have universal support for this project. As a result, the loss to the applicant clearly outweighs any gain to the public if the applicant were required to conform to the ordinance. Next, the value of surrounding properties will not be diminished by granting the variances. The proposal will improve the functionality and livability of the applicant's home, increase the value of the applicant's property and those around it, and as a result, the value of surrounding properties will not be negatively impacted in any way. There are also special conditions associated with this property which distinguish it from other properties in the area, such that the little enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. The property, as I mentioned, is already non-conforming as to the front yard setbacks. The shape of the lot that lies on the inside of the bend on Orchard Street, such that this property has no rear yards. The proposed addition is on the eastern side of the house, which is really the only logical placement for the addition, given the house's existing configuration of the lot. Property is on the western end of Orchard Street, where the public right-of-way turns and heads south, and it's one of only two properties with driveways. The use is also reasonable in that this house sits in a residential zone. And lastly, there's no fair and substantial relationship between the purpose of the ordinance as it's applied to this particular property. Purpose of the building coverage requirement is to prevent overcrowding of lots and unsightly properties and ones that are inconsistent with massing and structure of surrounding properties. The additional 240 square feet of building that we're seeking is minimal and not out of character for this property. We do believe that the modest addition will not in any way frustrate the purpose of the ordinance, and as a result, there's no fair and substantial relationship between the purpose of the setback requirement as it's applied to this particular property. So for all those reasons, the applicant does respectfully request your approval for the variances as advertised. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Redden.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 40 of our packet, your sheet or page A1, just want to 100% validate. So up in the upper left-hand corner of that drawing shows the existing house and the two proposed additions. There's sort of a dashed line that runs from the existing porch to the what it says rebuild existing stairs. So just to make it crystal clear, to the right of that line, there is currently a porch there. There is already structure that's taking up square footage on the property. The only thing you're proposing is the portion that is to the left of that line, which is essentially new build that isn't already there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then on your dimensional table below, you say that the current left yard is 29 feet. You're proposing 24. Both of those are greater than the 10-foot requirement. I just want to validate with city staff the current existing proposed conditions. You have right yard as 24 feet as existing, 24 feet proposed. Is there something that the applicant did not understand there, or is that a typo in the report?
This is for the left yard?
It's the right yard.
So the right yard is 24 feet here. And then we're looking at the rear yard back here.
Yeah, there's two things that say 24
Oh,
feet.
gotcha. Yep.
Yeah.
That that would be a typo for the rear yard.
Okay, I just want to make sure there was a discrepancy there between the applicant and what you guys wrote down. So I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Anyone to speak to, for, or against? Okay. And then the public hearing is closed. And
Madam Chair, if no one else will speak, I will move to approve the requested variance as presented and advertised.
is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Metzen.
Okay. First of all, I'll just say that I am somewhat jealous. I do love my house in Portsmouth, but this is a gorgeous house. You should be very proud of it. It's just a really kind of cool piece of architecture. It really starts out with a pretty simple square house design with a typical hip roof, but then adds in lots of additional elements and sort of the back addition that make it a very grand looking property indeed. So congratulations on that. And I do think that what you're asking for an additional space in the property, is modest and, is toward the interior of the property, is down in sort of a basement level. The vast majority of people walking by this house would probably not even notice the difference, and yet you will hopefully get some additional benefit out of it. So with that, just going through our criteria, there are criteria that need to be met. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. Again, as just indicated, really the only thing that is being asked for here is our relief from the total building coverage. 25% is allowed. The applicant is asking for 27%, a very modest increase. So granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. There's really nothing in terms of the characteristics of the neighborhood. This will be essentially invisible on the inside of the property, on a low level, sort of expanding off of an existing porch area. It's really not going to change any of the characteristics of the neighborhood. Completely fits in. Granting the variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance. Really here, we're just trying to make sure that there isn't a lot of extra coverage on a property where you start to put a lot of massing on it. I think one of the things that helps out in this here as well is, as the drawings shows on the applicant's property map here of page, I think it was page 40 of our setup. At any rate, on their sheet A1, page 40, there is some extra. Their property line really goes to a certain point, but there's lots of extra property that, from a passerby on Orchard Street, would appear to be part of this property, much greater than the 2% that the applicant is actually going over. So I just think, in terms of a sense of what the ordinance is trying to accomplish with preventing overcrowding, that really adds and helps to the applicant's requirements as well. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. There's really nothing here that the general public would have for an interest that outweighs the applicant's ability to add some additional living space to this property. Granting the variance would not diminish the values of the surrounding properties. Again, a very modest addition toward the interior of the property, fully meets all setbacks, is going to be largely unapparent, adds some value to the property and consequently probably other ones in the area. And then the hardship, again, the current property, I think the unique aspect that the applicant can draw off of here is that they are on a corner lot. They are proposing toward the interior of their property, and as I previously indicated, there is some additional, admittedly city-owned land, but it is, has the look and feel of being part of this property, and I think that really negates any of the concerns that this would be an unreasonable use for the property, and therefore I recommend approval.
Does the second have anything to add?
I just add that there's no threat to public health, safety, or welfare, and this doesn't otherwise injure public rights.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Okay, if not, a yes vote approves the project. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
Yes.
Ms. Margerson?
Yes.
Mr. Rayum?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Can we come have cocktails?
Turn the page.
house, isn't
It is a beautiful house.
it? Oh, it is. We didn't know
It's right across the street from the
Accented
two houses.
differently.
Oh, really?
The lot we split up, that's on,
Okay,
that's the backside.
this is item D, the request of point of view condominium owner for property located at 75 Salter Street, number 1, whereas relief is needed to relocate the existing residential structure landward of the high water mark, which requires the following. 1, variance from section 10.211 and section 10.531 to allow the following. A 2-foot front yard where 30 feet is required. B, a 2-foot side yard where 30 feet is required. 2, variance from section 10.321 to allow a lawful conforming structure to be extended, reconstructed, or enlarged without conforming to the requirements of the ordinance. 3, variance from section 10.516.40 to allow a heating vent to project 1 foot into the required side yard. Said property is located on Assessor Map 102, Lot 32-1, and lies within the waterfront business and historic district.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Zoning Board. My name is James Stein-Kraus. I'm an attorney with Rath Young Pignatelli. I represent the owners, Margot and Ned Thompson, who are here tonight. I'm also joined by my colleague Lauren Kilmister of Rath Young Pignatelli, Eric Weinreib of Altus Engineering, and Terrence Parker of Terra Firma Landscape Architecture. I would like to ask up front for some additional time so I can address some of the questions that were raised in public comments at the close of our presentation, if possible. We're here tonight to request a variance for relief for our client's 680 square foot building to allow for relocation of the building approximately 7.6 feet landward from over the Piscataqua River so they can utilize the building as their primary residence.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, could I do a point of order?
Of course.
So the applicant is asking for additional time. Do we need to suspend the rules to be able to?
I am sorry, I misunderstood that statement. Sorry, it went right by me. We do need to approve your request.
And I don't know what additional time the applicant is proposing to.
Approximately 5 minutes.
Oh,
Would that be okay?
of course, yes. Do we need to vote? Okay. Would someone make a,
Madam Chair, I move that we suspend the rules to allow the applicant 20 minutes to make their presentation.
okay, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So again, we're here tonight to request variance for the relief for a client's 680 square foot building to allow for relocation of the building approximately 7.6 feet landward from over the Piscataqua River so they can utilize the building as a primary residence. Just some background on the property. The building was originally constructed in around 1963 by the prior owner. My clients purchased 57 Salter Street in 1990. In 1992, they added heat, water, sewer, electrical, and utilized the building as an office. In 2018, my client sought variance relief for a change of use to convert the building from an office use to a single-family use, and from setbacks for the front, side yards, and lot size. This board granted that relief on December 18th, 2018, and my clients then received a building permit, which is cantilevered 5.6 feet over the Piscataqua River, violated the New Hampshire Wetlands Act and provisions of the Shoreland Water Protection Quality Act, Shoreland Water Quality Protection Act. Administrative order was issued by DES and was subsequently appealed by my clients to the Wetlands Council. We petitioned the City of Portsmouth to apply for an urbanized shoreline exemption for the parcel in April 2022. The city agreed, applied, and New Hampshire DES granted that petition on September 2nd, 2022. The exemption removed any obstacles regarding the lot size or residential use of the building within 50 feet of the river under the Shoreland Protection Act. Shoreland Water Quality Protection Act, excuse me. After months of negotiations, my clients in New Hampshire DES reached a settlement in which requires my clients to relocate the building over land. We're before you today to request that additional variances that will allow our clients to move forward with relocation of the building, renovation of the building, and resolution of the New Hampshire DES settlement so they can finally utilize the building in the primary residence. We seek reaffirmation to the extent necessary of the previously granted variances by this board on December 18th, 2018. Those relate to Article 3, Section 10.321, expansion of nonconforming structure, Article 4, Section 10.440, single-family dwelling, Article 5, Section 10.531, lot size, and Article 5, Section 10.531, continuous street frontage. We believe that the grant of the building permit by the City of Portsmouth on August 20, 2019 vested those variances. In addition to the prior variances, my clients seek relief from 4 other provisions of the zoning ordinance. Specifically, 1, Article 5, Section 10.531, side yard, to provide a 2-foot side yard instead of the required 30-foot side yard. That same article and section, front yard, to provide a 2-foot front yard instead of the required 30-foot front yard. Article 5, Section 10.516.40, projections into the required yards for that side heating vent, approximately 1 foot from the side of the building. And finally, Article 3, Section 10.312, expansion of a nonconforming structure, which will move the building but not expand the volume over and above the existing footprint or work previously approved and constructed under building permit 35117. We believe that our client's application satisfies the statutory criteria and requirements of Article 2, Section 10.23320 for the board to grant a variance. Specifically, we believe the request meets the following criteria. 1, granting the variance will not be contrary to public interest. Relocation of the building will allow the Thompsons to complete the renovation of their building, utilize it as a primary residence, and resolve the outstanding legal matters with DES. The relocation will also reduce any impacts of stormwater runoff to adjacent properties and the river itself by removing the building from over the water. This property has previously contained 2 residential buildings and outbuildings for over 150 years. The relief sought will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten public health, safety, or welfare. Granting relief will reduce environmental impacts, improve safety, and make the river more accessible to the public. 2, granting the variance will not be contrary to the spirit of the ordinance. The building's been located on this property since 1963, and relocating the building will not change the appearance of the building or the property. It will not be located near other structures, and the property is surrounded by water on 2 sides, condominium common area, and a roadway. Moving the building will actually improve the side yard setback from a negative 5.6 feet to a positive 2 feet, and will allow the construction of a structurally sound retaining wall that protects both the building, the property, and public waters. Granting the variance relief will allow the Thompsons to utilize the building as a primary residence consistent with the intent of the ordinance. 3, granting the requested relief will do substantial justice. The losses incurred by the Thompsons, should relief not be granted, would not be outweighed by any gain to the general public. Here they would be denied use of this building as a primary residence. They would not resolve the pending appeal with the Wetlands Council and would likely suffer additional expenses and costs for legal fees and unnecessary remedial action. The grant of relief would result in substantial justice for the Thompsons and result in improvements for the public and the environment. 4, granting the requested relief will not result in diminution of value of surrounding properties. Approving the relief would enhance the value of the building and not adversely impact those in the surrounding neighborhood. Relocation of the building would not change the appearance of the building, but allow for completion of the renovation, which would improve the attractiveness of the building and potentially minimize any traffic, and the use is consistent with the majority of the buildings in the neighborhood. Requiring the Thompsons to restore the property as a commercial office or event space, since it cannot be used as a residence otherwise, could potentially detract from the value of the surrounding properties. Finally, literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. Literal enforcement of the ordinance and the requirements of the waterfront district would result in unnecessary hardship upon the Thompsons due to the special conditions and attributes of the building, the subject property, and the unique circumstances of the New Hampshire DES appeal. This building was a former commercial boat repair shop, later converted into an office and subsequently granted relief to be used as a primary residence. The property and lot are currently located within the waterfront business district, which does not have minimum density requirements for residential uses. In this densely populated section of the south end of Portsmouth, the use of lot area, setbacks, frontage requirements help encourage safety through proper spacing between buildings. Movement forward will improve the rear setback of the building and provide this spacing. The Thompsons' property is unique in that it is surrounded by 2 sides on water, and even after relocation will not be closer to another principal structure within 20 feet of this building. Moving the building back from the water will also allow for construction of the concrete seawall, which will help protect the public waters from shoreline erosion, impacts of the building over water, and potentially prevent a catastrophic event in the building collapsing from an unstable conditions beneath the current structure. The existing structure is within the 100-year flood zone, and relocating the building allows the Thompsons to have a code-compliant home, which is in the public interest and will be addressed by my colleague, Mr. Weinreib. There's no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purposes of the ordinance and the frontage and side setback requirements applicable for this property, and the proposed use is a reasonable one. Therefore, we respectfully request that this board grant the variance consistent with Article 2 because one, the relief requested will not diminish the value of surrounding properties, would not be contrary to public interest, will do substantial justice, it would not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance, and literal enforcement would result in an unnecessary hardship. There's no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance and specific application of the waterfront provisions to this property, and the proposed use is reasonable. Before I introduce Mr. Weinreib, I'd like to just address some of the public questions that's been raised. First, the petition notes this request is property is located at 57 Salter Street, number 1. However, the zoning board adjustment agenda notes property located at 75 Salter Street. It is actually 57 Salter Street is the parcel and map. 57 Salter Street is Unit 2, the mailing address. The mailing address for Unit 1, which is owned by my clients, is 75 Salter Street. 57 Salter Street, the parcel itself, is the point of view condominium. The requests state the relief needed to relocate the existing structure landward of the high water mark. How many feet landward? It's actually going to be moved 7.6 feet, which is actually 2 feet landward of the retaining wall and high water mark. There was a question about the applicable business district. Given that this property is in the waterfront business district, the residential and mixed residential districts wouldn't apply. The request states that there's a 2-foot front yard where 30 is required. Does that mean we're moving the structure 28 feet? No. We're asking for relief from the 30-foot requirement. Another question asks, this states the variance, whether the structure would be extended, reconstructed, or enlarged without conforming to the requirements of the ordinance. Are there plans to extend the existing structure? No, simply relocate it. Are there plans to reconstruct the existing structure? No, again, we're simply relocating the building. Are there plans to enlarge the existing structure? No, the same 680 square feet and same footprint would be utilized. It would simply be moved 7.6 feet landward. Alternatives of variance relief to extensions, reconstruction, or enlargement that have already occurred. Are there no new plans to extend, reconstruct, or enlarge the existing building? No. The request state that, excuse me, where are the plans on what will be extended, reconstructed, or enlarged without conforming to the requirements of the ordinance? The plans were submitted, what was proposed with our application. Again, there'll be no extension, reconstruction, or enlargement. We're simply seeking relief so we can relocate the existing non-conforming building. The request states that as a written statement, this is open-ended. We do not believe it is an open-ended request. Ask what current physical limitations of the non-conforming structure being extended, reconstruct or enlarge without conforming to the requirements of the ordinance. The key constructural current physical limitation is it's located 5.6 feet over public water of the state of New Hampshire. Therefore, the building cannot be converted into a residential property. Therefore, we need to relocate it over landward. The second question is if it's open-ended, which we believe it's not. Finally, facing the river, there's a small shed to the left of the structure. Is a small shed part of the petition? No. Are there any plans to extend, reconstruct, or enlarge the small shed? No. And are there plans to move the small shed landward? And if so, what are they? There is no plans to relocate, move, or alter the shed in any way. And finally, there was a question about the bylaws of the commission, of the condominium. The bylaws of the condominium actually prevent temporary or short-term rentals. And I believe that answers all the questions. And I'll just briefly, Mr. Weinreib will address the design benefits. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, there's a question for you first.
I have a question for you. So the 2018 variances were to allow for a single-family dwelling, but yet you have 2 units in the building. How did that happen?
There's just one unit in the building. There's two units in the condominium, excuse me.
But it was a single-family dwelling. It was supposed to be a single-family dwelling when the variances were granted in 2018.
Right, on the parcel itself, there are two buildings. Unit 2 is a single-family residence, and then my client's property, which is a separate building, a separate condo unit, will be a single-family residence.
I think I'm a little confused.
Sorry.
Yes. Before you do that, can you tell us who you are if
Oh,
you're
sorry.
going to speak?
Can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, introduce yourself.
Eric Weinrib with Altus. So, this is the existing building, the single family that we're not doing anything, part of the condominium unit. And then this yellow structure is the condominium unit that we're working with. So there's two dwellings on the overall.
In the small building.
Does that clarify it, Beth?
I don't know,
The
but I'll let you
building
know.
that is being moved is one unit?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
So the building in yellow will
And
be,
the house in the background is the other unit of the condominium?
correct, and we're not doing any work to that.
Okay, yes, please.
If I may elaborate, Madam Chair, just to address your
You
concern.
were here in 2018.
So, well, that was part of it, but what they're talking about here is, okay, so we had the application last week for the Chinburg property on Maplewood. The concern was, hey, we're asking for duplex units, right? So here this was a condominium composed of duplex units. This is a condominium composed of single dwelling units. So that's why it's the same thing. They're just saying that we approved that them having a single dwelling unit where one wasn't allowed because it's in Waterfront Business District. You're not allowed any of them whatsoever. So it's the same relief that was coming before us for
Okay.
the duplex units.
All right, thank you.
Well,
2 condominiums, 2 buildings. Okay.
Correct.
one condo.
Are we,
Mr. Weinreb
Yes.
wanted to just address some of the benefits of the design. Thank you.
Again, Eric Weinrib. So we were not involved in the original design and the permitting. The former surveyor and engineer provided the data for us to move forward and help get the Thompsons back into moving forward. So our exercise came down to 2 real items. One was the removal of the 87 feet over the water of the dwelling unit, and the other was to, once we started moving the structure, actually dealing with FEMA issues, because the building was already there, and we didn't have to raise it up to comply with FEMA. It was in the flood zone. And the flood zone changed, maps changed, but the elevation didn't. Can you, I don't know if I can do it, go to the next sheet.
I have, which one?
There you go. So that's a blow up of the unit, condominium unit that we're working with. So they're detached structures on a single lot forming a 2 units, 2 residential units. So what we did is our exercise involved, the building was cantilevered on a concrete slab. It is cantilevered on a concrete slab over the water. There's pilings. And so DES said you can't have that 87 square feet of dwelling area over the water. So we had to find a way to pick that up. So we're going to be picking up the building temporarily, relocating it probably where the parking spaces are, remove the existing foundation that's there, removing the concrete that's over the water. And then when we were out there initially, we saw that the retaining wall under the building and adjacent to the building on the south side was deteriorating. So like, well, we're not going to build it, DES said just move it landward. So we could have moved it just to the edge of to the land. We said, probably not a good idea. So now we are proposing that area that I'm showing in red as a retaining wall to have a vertical element constructed, engineered by a structural engineer, between the building and the water, and then do the foundation for the building behind it. So we have, why we're moving it 7.6 feet is to get it landward, to have that retaining wall as a separate structure and not part of the building foundation. That we're doing it, sliding it on parallel along the same lines of the existing building so that we're not going any closer to Salter Street, we're just moving landward. While we move it landward and we have it over on the other side, now we're going to raise it up a little higher, make it FEMA compliant, and that's where the changes occur on the outside of the building, which if you want Terrence to speak to, we can. The way the building's designed, there's no real stairwell in, it's very small. No real stairwell inside the building. There's a ladder system to go to the second floor, raising the building. Now, that steel staircase that was approved by the HCC, if you raise everything up, is going to be dangling on the ground, above the ground. So Terrence came in and worked with the owners to create a landing area in front here to tie into the front entry here. So that's going to be on, I believe, granite and up, raised up. So then we have the steps down. You come down the stair, there's a granite step here, you have a flat landing area, and then you step down. So everything had to be raised up a couple feet to meet that FEMA requirements as we raised the floor. I would only want to note a couple other minor items, and actually, when we got involved, it was John that brought that up to me, Mr. Shagnon. Should we prevail and get all the way through the buildings moved, that means that we actually have to change the condo documents because the building's in a different location and limited common areas. The unit dwelling areas stay the same. All the way around, but the structure will change, so that condominium document plan will need to be updated. Do you have any questions of me? I knew you would.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you've raised, literally, my biggest concern and question here, which is, so the building is now at a higher elevation than it was before.
Right.
Which means, which means that you now have like steps and things that are all above 18 inches relative to the previous height of the land that you had around the building. Yep. Is that additional, anything that's above 18 inches around it, included in your total coverage calculation?
Well, because that's all landscape area, that was, I believe, included in our, because it was that is hardscape, whereas the areas outside that's permeable are not. So that is hardscape, yes, that was covered.
Okay, yeah, because you've got a couple percent to the 30% allowable,
Yeah.
but not by much. And I just want to make sure that you have a lot more stuff now that is above 18 inches, in my impression at any rate, than you had before with sort of the front entry. And which also goes to my other concern, which is we say we have a 2-foot setback from the water side, so that would be the, I believe the right side of the property as we're viewing it. However, there's a deck that covers that, which is an improvement over that. And that deck, I believe, would be more than 18 inches above what the previous grade of the property would have been.
So on you're talking about over the water?
Over the water, because you got a deck that extends out over the water.
So that's the wharf that's there now, so where we could have left that as an open area and kept the wharf where it was.
Yep.
But what we're doing is we're cutting off. Come on here. We're cutting off this portion of the wharf, and then where the building was, we're recreating that wharf. So we're sliding it back. The elevation doesn't change. So we're not changing on any of the covered area, wharf area over the water. We're removing the same amount that the building was occupying. And that actually because we're taking a portion of the building that's over water that we didn't count as coverage because it really wasn't on the property.
Yep.
That's now on the property, so that goes against our lot coverage.
Correct. Your lot coverage is being negatively impacted because you're right. You had some
We're fixing
building
it.
that previously was miraculously off your property. It's now on your property. I guess my sole concern is we're saying we have a 2-foot setback to the right side property yard adjacent to the water. But if you have a deck there that is, because you've raised the whole height of everything for this property now, that deck relative to what used to be the height of everything, and my impression is it's more than 18 inches over. So do we have a 2-foot setback, or do we really have a 0-foot setback? And I don't know if there's any discussion with planning staff on that point.
So the 2-foot is that building, yeah, and I get where you are, and then we have the gap of the retaining wall.
Right.
And when we step down into the wharf area, and I don't know how many times I asked this when we were meeting with DEF, is that we cannot connect the wharf to the building.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like I said, as a handrail, I said, can that be connected? Like, no, it has to be a gap. And I still can't really, because then it would be part of the building. But I'm not going down that road tonight.
So I don't know if planning staff looked at that
Yeah.
concern. Do you understand my concern?
I do. And I think the interpretation was that was existing deck. So what's changing is the building.
Yeah.
It's being moved back with a 2-foot setback.
Yeah, my concern is the deck is now higher than it would have been. I mean, it wasn't a deck there before, it was a building there before, but all the structure that's there is higher than what was previously there, if I'm to understand what the applicant's technical representative is telling us.
Yeah.
And we disapproved something a few weeks back, because they were improving their lot and raising the height of it up above the height of what had been there before. We said, oh no, you're making an improvement above 18 inches, that's now considered covered area. And I'm just concerned that it applies towards the total building coverage and towards the setback.
Mr. Mattson, I saw your hand next.
Yeah. I guess I'll just ask in general. So I guess my first part of the question is, I know they're raising the whole the structure, the dwelling, the proposed dwelling is being raised, but the wharf is not necessarily being raised. But clearly the wharf would be 18 inches over the water, but I don't know about 18 inches over the land, and I don't know how the ordinance defines that.
Right, that has been my thinking as well. What do we know?
But just to confirm, you're not raising the...
I don't believe, it had been a couple
I'm not
weeks since I had
ignoring
looked at it, but it's not our intent that we were going to be raising that wharf. We're just going to be taking the wharf that's out here, cutting it off and replacing it, fully
Okay.
reconstructed.
Mr. Mantle was next.
Okay, so if I'm following this right, it's tough enough to get the house numbers straight. The wharf isn't changing, correct? The wharf for the entire condo complex is not changing.
So the common area wharf does not change.
Okay, you're moving the house back, correct?
Correct.
And you're doubling the size of the deck, correct?
No.
Well, according to your pictures, that's what it's saying.
No, not at all. So the area of deck that we have today, we have to cut 87 feet off of that because that is right now building area. So we can't, if we move the building back, we can't make that wharf because DES will not let us.
I'm talking about the deck on your plans.
There's no deck on our plan.
Excuse me.
It's the landing area coming off the building that's, it's not a deck, it's just a landing area. So it's landscaping.
I'm looking at your plans on page,
One that's up there.
no.
No?
Okay, go down 3 pictures. One more, right there. Or go down one more. That one. On the original plan, you don't have a deck that's that big. That looks double the size of your current deck. Does it not?
Are you talking on the right?
The water side.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have the
It's-
steps coming
that's
down
the
the north, in the northeast corner going down to the wharf, correct?
It's the exact same area of deck that is there today. The wharf is the same.
But was the house on top of half of it?
Yes.
Yes, the house was on top of half of it, so the deck wasn't seen. So why that deck looks bigger is because it's totally uncovered. But that deck, wharf, whatever you want to call it, was under the existing building?
No.
So it
No,
has
so the
been
building was
enlarged.
over the water. So it just kind of, the building's over the water, the deck's over the water. We pull the building back, we either have a gap of open right next to the building, or we cut off the deck so that it can be right next to the building. We're not increasing anything
You just
over the
moved-
water. We're just
Moved, okay,
moving it landward.
okay.
the wharf extends out further, we have to bring it back to fill that gap of 87th Street. So there's no net gain.
It can't be. DES won't allow it.
It is very hard to see that on here, I have to say.
That's why
Plan show, I'm sorry.
it shows up, I think it shows up pretty well on my site plan, 2 of 2.
Mr. Ram?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you being gracious with the time. I still do think that there's a concern here, and I guess I would point to page 65 of our packet, which is architectural sheet number 2. So, to me, this illustrates my concern, and also, to some extent, the concern that Mr. Mantle is expressing. So you're right, that I think the building was moved back, but in the space where the building was vacated, they created what they described here as a new work, raised deck and seawall. And my concern is that raised deck, if you look across, is at the same elevation, in fact, maybe a slightly higher elevation than the front steps, which are also defined as new work, raised terrace and stone steps, see landscape plan, and which the applicant's technical representative has already indicated, oh yes, those should count towards total square footage because they are greater than 18 inches relative to what I'm presuming was the original line, which is this thick black line is below all that. My concern is similarly is the back deck 18 inches over, which the back deck now comes essentially right up to the house, which means there is not a 2-foot setback. There's in fact a 0-foot setback because there is structure in that distance of 2 feet between the house and where the property line exists that has something greater than 18 inches in it. That's my concern.
And that's that red area, that's actually the retaining wall. So that's the revetment.
But you're building something on top of the retaining wall. It's being
No,
used.
not at all. It's a cap on top of the retaining wall, and that retaining wall is replacing retaining wall that's there.
So why on page 65 is it described as a new deck, guardrail, and stairs? It looks like a place that is meant for people to be able to sit out and entertain
So
themselves.
it is at the same level as the wharf, and so you come out on, you don't want to step up and over the retaining wall, you don't want to step down, so it's a flush element, same as the wharf area, and you need to have that handrail there, otherwise there'd be a gap, and then someone could fall through it. So that's why it looks like it's contiguous as a larger area. And that's why we moved it inward, so we could have that space for that retaining wall.
I have a question for city and I guess for us to consider. So even if the wharf is over 18 inches and should be counted as coverage, it's not on the land. So why would we consider that? Are you suggesting the 2 feet are on the land? And we're hearing that it's not,
That's retaining wall.
that's retaining wall. So I guess we have to decide,
So
and that's how the city thought about it. Yes, Julian, can you?
Yeah, so under measurement rules, looking at 10.515.10, it speaks to determinations of yards, and one of them is structures such as decks and patios less than 18 inches above ground level, is what the language is.
So what is ground level here, I guess, is the fundamental question. If the applicant is raising everything up, what was ground level? Is this still at ground level or not? And we can approve 2 feet setback. My concern is that afterwards, somebody will say, oh, no, that's above 18 inches. You need a 0-foot setback. And the applicant is right back here again, if this moves forward. which it may or may not.
Are there other questions for the applicant right now?
Well,
Would you,
I have one clarification question.
yes, please.
So the top of the retaining wall is planned to be stepped on as if it were part of the wharf decking area? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Please say yes into the mic.
sorry, yes, so the answer is yes, but it is a separate, the
We know
retaining wall,
there's-
I'll leave it as, thank you. The retaining wall is separate from the building itself.
Yes.
And is necessary to protect the building and is required for us to repair by DS.
Ms. Margiston, a
I think
question?
that was my thing. The retaining wall and the wharf are not part of the application. It's the house
Right.
that is the application. So I don't see it as an issue, actually.
I think the potential concern with that, if it'd be improperly advertised as a 2 feet setback, if it's over 18 inches, it's considered a structure, so even though it's not the dwelling, it would change the 2 foot setback. But I think everybody's aware of that, so.
Okay.
It's up to you, madam. You can not recognize me. I'm fine with that.
Is it on the same exact
Well,
subject?
it's just I just want to reiterate one small
Okay.
point, if I may. Thank you, Madam Chair, I appreciate it. Is, again, in the applicant's own presentation, page 65, it says on the left-hand side of the page, new work, raised deck and seawall. Doesn't say just, and that runs from over the water right up to the very edge of the building, which the very edge of the building we know is 2 foot back from what is the property line. So my concern is that is in fact a deck. It is a usable space that's intended to be used for as part of the enjoyment of this property, and all those decks, as per our zoning ordinance, is something that would be considered, if it's above 18 inches, as part of the coverage and part of the setback requirements. That is my only point. I'm done. Thank you.
If
No,
I may.
and I do understand that, and I would think one could tell, even though I understand the moving the house is what we're here for, I would think one could tell us if that deck was above 18 inches. That doesn't seem unknowable.
Can I don't know what your 65 is, but I presume it's Soma Studios Architectural Sheet 4.
Sheet 2.
It was up there.
Okay, so when you look at the bottom half, where it says new work, raised deck, that's over water. And then it actually shows this, on the top side, it shows new work, raised deck, and seawall. So those lines have different spots. So you can see clearly, even on those plans, represent the same thing that we're representing, is that the deck is over the water, and that there's a 2 foot gap showing the retaining wall, and then that comes around the corner on the south side of the property. Does that kind of clarify it?
You may.
I'm sorry. And there's nothing on top of that seawall. There's no boards or anything on top
So
of it.
that, on top of that retaining wall, it's just a top cap.
Okay.
When you say retaining wall, you mean seawall?
Seawall,
Okay,
retaining
so
wall.
that's, so we just got to make sure we're talking about the same thing, so.
And if I might note that it is an improvement from the negative 5.6 where the building's
That,
currently over.
no one's denying that. Okay, we're with
Thank you.
you on that.
So, just for my own clarification, you're moving back the house. The house currently has a deck, the dock, whatever, on the Piscataqua side, the water side. That's approximately, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet, but that's all common, correct?
No. So there's, so the square deck here, where it says deck, here.
If you could bring the mic, thanks. Sorry.
No, not what you're going to do. What's there right now, okay, is you have the house, it's whatever over the water, and in front of that is...
Is wharf.
No. It's not, because I'm looking at the pictures and they have chairs and whatever in front of their house.
I guess so right now the building is pushed out almost 6 feet over the water. The foundation actually extends out over the water.
Okay.
And then there's a wharf.
Okay, the wharf. Let's call it the wharf.
So the wharf.
Which is right in front of the house, and that's where they have chairs, and that's a common wharf, correct?
No, that's part of the condo unit. It's not a common area.
Okay. It's their condo unit, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's what I'm saying. You're pushing the house back.
Right.
You're still going to have, well, because you're pushing the house back and you're raising it up, you can no longer connect flush with that wharf, correct?
Right. So.
Okay.
No, but let me.
So
finish.
you're using the space vacated by the house over the water, and adding.
No.
Well, I mean, your plans show.
Right, but
it's double the space.
Can you go back? There's.
Actually, just
This is.
on this one, if you could, you can see right here, here's mean high water. The house goes over the water right now. Here's the limits of that dock.
That exists now.
Dock, wharf.
Wharf, right.
Go to the next sheet. I just want to show limited common area and see this portion right here. That's the portion that's has been removed. This is your new area here. The area in red is the retaining wall. The house went from this point here, slides back here.
Okay, look at
We're cutting off all that area of the building area that's over the water is getting cut off on portion of the dock. So
What does your legend say? In the upper right, brown, new deck.
Yeah.
Brown striped, new deck, formal building area. Would I not
Here,
conclude
former
that
building
all of the
area.
brown is a new deck?
No, because currently the property line extends to the existing location of the wharf. So.
out to here, out to that line.
Okay. Why does it matter?
So currently the wharf that I mentioned before
It doesn't
comes here.
matter.
Oh,
Paul.
Okay? As part of the agreement, since we're moving the building back 5.6 feet over water, this created a hole. DES said you cannot add 87 more square feet of deck, so you must move it back. So we're filling this new deck area here, and then that way this deck area here has to move back. So there's a compensation, there's no new net deck over water. The existing, has to remain exactly the same square footage.
So the current wharf that's currently there is gone.
Well, it's currently there, but it will have to be moved back. So the deck right here, what you're talking about, the deck, currently looks like this, right here. Or actually right here. It will actually be moved backward so that the net 87 square feet will be removed from here and replaced there.
Okay.
So there'll be no net increase.
The white area is your current deck.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think what you said made sense to me, at least. No, please, go ahead.
I apologize. I have
No, you
two
don't
questions
have to.
completely unrelated to everything we've talked
Go
about
for
so
it.
far. One is a very lawyerly question, so while you're up, I'll ask a very lawyerly question. So you have asked for this board to reaffirm the decision of the board back in 2018. What are you looking for with this reaffirmation? Then you kind of, during your presentation, said, you kind of said a little bit like, if it's necessary, or some other similar words.
Right.
So what are you expecting from this board, and why do you think that the relief that you were granted back in 2018 is in jeopardy in some way, shape, or manner?
We didn't. We just thought to the extent necessary that it needed to be reaffirmed. We asked for it. However, we do believe that by the grant of the building permit, that variance vested in 2018.
Okay. And
2019, excuse me.
And for city staff, you are in agreement based off of your review of the situation?
Yes.
Okay. And then this 1 foot encroachment into the front yard, what, and this I guess maybe goes back to a little bit more technical, what is encroaching within 1 feet? Is there something that illustrates that?
Is there the vent?
It's a pipe.
It's the mechanical vent.
It's a mechanical vent.
So it's just a square vent would be on the side of the building.
Okay.
Ask for relief from that.
We have it on the.
It shows up, I think, on one of the other architectural.
I'm sorry, but could you please say your name again
Yep,
before a
Eric
new
Weiner
voice
with
goes on?
Altus. It's on the other south view, I believe. So
Okay.
So it's a projection for the furnace vent.
And so the variance that you cited is actually a paragraph that does not apply to the waterfront business district. So I guess how do you feel that we can approve that? And or I think city staff may have had a recommendation on that. How do we get around this conundrum?
Well, we did it. We included it to the extent that it was necessary. However, it's not applicable to the waterfront business district. Then I guess we wouldn't need it.
Yeah, so I'll just address the comments from the staff memo that it's not, the section cited is not applicable in the waterfront business district. So staff doesn't recommend that relief is needed to that section. If the board wants to address it, you could certainly condition it or address it in your findings of fact.
Well, and so I guess that'd be the one last question from the staff's perspective. Does that encroachment, should we then say that it's a 1 foot setback to cover that item? Or do we think that that item is not substantial enough as being something over 18 inches that it would be a concern for granting a building permit if it's not accounted for?
Yeah, I don't think that we think it's substantial enough that it would be a concern, but you could certainly say as, presented or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition?
Marcia McCormick, 53 Salter Street. And I just have to say that we were never notified that this was going to be converted into condominiums. Is there some kind of a procedure that you go through to do that?
I don't know how to. I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, so
it's certainly not something that we would be part of.
All right. Well, the original Board of Adjustment, the original variance was for. I don't want to get into it. It's just too much. I'm dizzy from reading this and hearing this, and it's nothing about this is appropriate for that area. I don't think. I don't understand why they didn't get DES approvals, but they didn't. That's not my fault. My house is right on top of this. They've expanded the parking area so that I'm on top of a parking lot, literally. And now moving this house forward, it's just too much, But I do want to say, I was reading this letter that the attorney wrote, and it said, moving the building back from over the water allows for the construction of a concrete seawall. The seawall will help protect the public waters from erosion and the potential for a catastrophic event. Well, if that's the condition that seawall and that building is in, it's pretty dangerous. So I don't even understand why the city gave a building permit for this, because it shouldn't have. So now we are stuck with all this mess, and I am opposed to moving that building. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone to speak to, for, or against this proposal?
I'm Susan McDougall. I live at 39 Prey Street, and my property runs to Salter Street, so I'm sort of in a butter, I guess, depending on who you're talking to. I'm totally flabbergasted. Since this property has been owned by the current owners, there have been any number of variances. I lost count of the number of variances to do what they wanted to do. It started in 1990 when they bought the property. They glommed two things together, then they did this, and every single one of those decisions had to be a variance to their property, which they bought knowing was in the waterfront business district. So by granting all those variances, including the one in 2018, you have de facto changed the waterfront business district code. And by doing that, you're setting a precedent for what might come down the pike on my side of the road, if I want to talk very personally, but I think it's in Portsmouth's interest to think about the whole city, that Sanders could be a huge, big variance upon variance upon variance, granted because there's precedent. So you granted these variances in 2018. They condominiumized the property in 2020. We weren't notified that there was a condominium agreement. Condominiums seem like that seems to be something that neighbors should have some say to. And now, I don't even think the other condo owners are here or present or supporting this project, which I find kind of unusual, that you have a condominium association applying for variances, one owner and not the others. It impacts, in the practical sense, it impacts the parking by having to move this back. So as they mentioned, the condominium agreements are going to have to be changed, but there's no indication from the other owners that that is going to be acceptable. So you have that to consider, like what happens down the pike. I'm concerned about the 18 inches and wondering why it doesn't have to be raised, whether that's the actual floodplain requirement to raise this building, like whether it has to just go 18 or whether it has to go higher. And in looking at the project that was going to be the Sanders through the zoning board, their building was going to be considerably higher, their new project, which is not happening. So I'm concerned about that. Like, is it going to be higher? That's going to make a big difference. It does impact the parking. That's going to be a condo mess, I'm sure. And then you are making decisions. You're changing code in the waterfront district by granting all these variances. And I would say that given what one of the issues is, that you say granting the variance would be not contrary to public interest. Well, it is contrary to public interest if you're changing a code without public input in the way that a code should be changed. I mean, if you're going to change the waterfront business district codes by granting variance after variance after variance, then you're de facto changing the code. Okay? So that will set a precedent for every other, and especially the very big project, which could come down the pike when the Sanders decide they don't want to sell lobsters anymore. That's my particular personal point of view in terms of that. But it is, I think, affects the whole city. And, I just think it's inappropriate. There are other issues here, but I don't think I need to go into them because I think I would disagree with what was presented by the applicants. Thank you.
Thank you. 2, 4, or against?
James Steinkrauss.
As brief as we can be.
Very brief. One, I'm not aware of an obligation to notify neighbors of conversion of a property, especially 2 units of a condominium. The condo abutter at 57 did submit a letter of support that's in the public record. And finally, I lost my last point. What was the last point? Well, yeah, I got that. So the key point was that, and then the variance is specific to this property, and if we meet the statutory criteria. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Eric Weinrib. I do want to iterate that, yes, the building's getting higher. We're not asking for height variance on the, and we're not impacting the parking. The parking fields all stay the same. And we are in the waterfront business area, waterfront business district, and there's very little waterfront business left. We do have Sanders Lobster Pound. I am quite certain, and it's not a threat, and it's just how it is, that if this old bait shack became a bait shack again, I think there would be public outcry of odor and the traffic and everything else on Salter Street, where there really isn't a great way to turn around. That it is waterfront business, but I don't think that's really what works in this zone anymore. Thank you.
I guess I just want to remind you that what we're doing here tonight is not discussing the use of the property at all, but just we're talking about variance for being too close to the lot lines, basically. So our concern tonight is pretty narrow. Public hearing's closed. Thank you. Okay. What would you like to do? Get to nudge me. Yes, Ms. Marchison.
I do think that this situation is extremely complicated, to say the least. However, I will be supporting the application because it is about the the side yards. Let me just get back to exactly what it was to our staff memo, but it is, okay. So it's about the front yard and right yard setbacks. And for our purposes, for the right yard setback, it's going from negative 5.6 to 2, which is, obviously making it a much more conforming use. The property obviously has special conditions because it's over the water. So I mean, that's my thinking. Looking at it in terms of the zoning relief which they're asking from us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Middle.
Very confused. And since we don't govern what's underwater, it makes it what's over water even more confusing. I would expect, just like with a demolition permit, you're moving the building, I would expect that the setbacks, while it's nice to go from negative to a positive number, I would want them, because you're moving the building, I would want those setbacks to be less non-conforming. They are. I'd like to see more. That's where I'm at right now.
Okay. Mr. Mattson.
I just, the one, I hear Mr. Mandel's point for sure, and I was thinking about this. Although I'm inclined to support this project because by the nature of it being a waterfront business, the setbacks are quite odd in terms of trying to meet 30-foot setbacks on the front, left, and right yard, particularly for this size lot, which is like half the size of the required waterfront business. So I think as much as if you are moving it and you're at your fresh start, it would be good to have it become conforming. There is also something to moving at the least amount required to meet, in this case, it would be the DES's criteria that's triggering all of this in the first place. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ram?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I was on the board back in 2018 when we approved the original set of variances that have led to where we're at right now. I believe the chair was also, but I think if you look at the record, you were absent that night.
Oh, thank you.
Cleverly absent that night.
You were lucky.
A couple things. I really want to address, I mean, I empathize with the abutters. I recognize there's a lot of change going on here. There's a lot of things that happened, as has been indicated. Some things that even the city doesn't have any control over in terms of condoization and whatnot. Those are, property owners' rights that are allowed by law, et cetera. I'm not an expert on it. One of the lawyers and the board could maybe weigh in on it. The waterfront business district, when zoning was set up about 100 years ago, it was recognized that when we create zones and put rules down on what can be done, what can't be done, which, by the way, before all that, it was just the wild, wild west, right? If you had property, you could do whatever you want. You built right up to the edge of it, and you could build as high as you wanted, and it's your property, and that's all that mattered. And at the turn of the previous century, people started to realize, wow, you know what? I lose some of my property rights, but I gain some advantages if I can also prevent my neighbor from doing all these extreme things in their property. So that's the basis of zoning, right? I lose something in my ability to build on my property, but I gain something in that, boy, my neighbors don't get to do a lot of these crazy things as well. But the recognition was that by doing that, it was going to be kind of somewhat generic in what all those rules were going to be. And there was really needed to be an outlet to be able to say, for my specific property, those rules don't fully apply because of this, and this being the special characteristics about my property, and that's the basis for this board. That's the basis for all kinds of court cases that come down to the 5 criteria that we judge each of our variances by. Are we setting precedents? We believe not. Each case comes before us individually. We are looking especially for a hardship that tells us why this particular property is different from all the other ones around it, that gives it the ability to say, you know what, that rule that applies to all my neighbors shouldn't fully apply to me. So we do take this very seriously. Back in 2018, we took it very seriously. The Waterfront Business District, especially this board, if you look back at the history of it, we take that one very, very seriously because we do recognize, going to all kinds of forums around the city, charrettes and whatnot, where we talk about visions for the city. Waterfront business is one of the things that always keeps coming up and saying, we do believe this is an essential element of the city. That said, we recognized back in 2018, and the applicants, they convinced this board at that point in time, and because they got a building permit within time, it's taken them a long time to actually execute that building permit because of things that in part were out of their control. But we had recognized that the Waterfront Business District does not fully apply to this particular parcel because of its location, because of some of its unique characteristics. And so we did go ahead and allow that. And I do, in terms of parking, I don't think that this request increases that concern in and of itself. The open space coverage that the applicant has is actually slightly increasing from what it was before. So there's a 20% that's the minimum open space that you need to keep. This applicant has over 50%. So over half of the lot is considered open space. In theory, the applicant could go and cover another 30% of their lot with additional parking if they wanted to go and do that purely by right within the Waterfront Business District. They're not asking to do that. I understand that it may seem all very much, but I do think that the applicant is within what they are allowed to do by right here. And to Mr. Mandel's point about the setbacks, I do agree that this is seemingly an awful lot of relief. Similarly, there was concern back in 2018 about the same thing when we talked about the 0-foot setback, and then there was a 4-foot setback that we granted, which I think was related to, it must have been to stairs or something that was above 18 inches. It's a little unclear. I'd have to go back and look at the application to figure out what that was. But, 30 feet is required. But again, that's kind of unusual, as you pointed out, because it's waterfront business. If it was a more like a general residence, that would probably be more like a 10-foot figure. But the thing that really sells it for me is the location of the building. What we're really concerned about with the setbacks is light and air relative to your neighbors. And because it's essentially on a little peninsula going into the water, its only neighbors are water on two sides that they're really affecting. So in terms of impact to the surrounding neighbors, there really isn't any, and really the spirit of what our ordinance is trying to accomplish, where you don't go and build that garage or other thing that's right on the property line that's going to, darken my backyard or whatever, really doesn't apply to this particular instance. Again, because of unique characteristics of this property and the fact that it's sort of jutting out into the water. So with that, I do think the relief that's being asked for is relatively minimal. I think that the applicant has gone through a lot. They're trying to get this straightened out. I'm hopeful that the argument about the deck that I was concerned with isn't a real thing, and hopefully that there's no concerns down the road that somehow that there is additional relief that needs to be granted for this project. But with that, I would support what's being asked for.
Mr. Rahun, would you like to make that into a motion?
Madam Chair, just for you,
Thank you.
There you go.
And for the record.
And for the
and for the record, I will move to approve the application as presented and advertised, which also includes the fact that we recognize, as a stipulation, we recognize that there is a 1 foot encroachment by an exhaust vent that exists that is covered by what we are granting here today.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So I've talked a lot already. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. Again, this is in keeping with the characteristics of the neighborhood overall. I know a couple of the butters are upset about the nature of what's taking place here, but again, going back specifically, they have already had this approved as a second dwelling unit. That was happened back in 2018. The applicant has, in essence, cemented that into place by the actions that they've taken to this point in time. We're really talking here about the net difference to the public of this building being over the water versus this building being slightly drawn back from the water. Essentially the same building, a little bit additional concerns because of the fact that it's being raised up somewhat with some entry structures, but again, relatively minimal, still within all the allowed building coverages for the lot, et cetera. So with that in mind and keeping it that narrow, I do believe that there is nothing here that would disrupt the nature of the neighborhood by moving the structure inward and still keeping it fairly close to where it was before, but a couple feet back from the edge of, again, up against the water. Granting the variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance. Again, light and air is our main concern with the setbacks. As I previously indicated, there's some unique characteristics here, which means that they really are doing the things that we're concerned about with the ordinance, and they can do that because of the unique nature of the property that they're on. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. Again, that's a balancing test, and while there is again some concerns, I think a lot of those concerns were things that were addressed back in 2018 and not necessarily what's before this board tonight for this particular instance. I do think that the applicant's request to move their property on land, there is benefits to the public in terms of getting, better compliance with state laws, as we've come to understand the impacts to watersheds of having living structures over them, wanting to move all of that back from the waterfront. They are going to be more compliant with those goals that our state has set forward, and really by doing that, and they can still, on the balancing test for them, you still have the full use of the property as was granted back in 2018 to have this same size structure be a living structure. Granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties. Again, moving the structure, the distance that they're moving it, I don't see that as impacting the value of the structures. The idea that it's condoized, et cetera, all things that have taken place in the past are not relevant to this particular analysis, so therefore I don't think it would affect those. And then a little enforcement, the hardship criteria. Is there a hardship here? And again, I believe there is. First of all, this has been granted previous relief to make this 2 separate dwelling units, and it ran into some legal issues. So that's sort of one of the hardships that the applicant ran into is the nature of the law that was kind of identified relatively late in the process. Has affected this and required this action to move the actual structure back onto the land. And as I've indicated, it's on the very end of a very narrow, short street. Waterfront business was decided back in 2018, but some of the dimensions that are required there really aren't fully applicable to this particular property because of its location, and again, especially because of the nature of the fact that the area of concern is surrounded on water by both sides. So with those, and it's a reasonable use overall, and one that was approved back in 2018. So with that, I recommend approval.
Does the second have anything to add?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. If there is no further discussion, then I'm going to call for a vote. A yes approves the project. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
No.
Ms. Margerson?
Yes.
Mr. Ray?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. You're approved.
Can we take a break?
Yeah, we would like to take a 10-minute break, and I know you people have been waiting a long time, but
inspirational. And it's fascinating.
So-
and also that as an engineer too.
Okay, we're back in
So it's
session.
political.
We are back in session.
Approving plans as presented.
And the next item of business is the request of Eric J. Gregg, Revocable Trust owner, for a property located at 112 Mechanic Street, whereas relief is needed to install a mechanical unit to the side of the primary structure, which requires the following. 1, variance from section 10.515.14 to allow a 2-foot rear setback where 10 feet is required. Said property is located on Assessor Map 103, Lot 25, and lies within the General Residence B and Historic District. Is there anyone to speak to this?
I'm Eric Gregg.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Eric Gregg, owner of the property, 14-year Portsmouth resident. And there's a little, that was the original submission. And further work, it's actually a 6-foot setback. It's not a 2-foot setback. So I don't know if that was caught in the updated version. So I want to start out by thanking staff planner Harris for her helping cajole the application, hopefully making it sufficiently something you all get through and addresses most of the questions. I also, in keeping with this being, I think, the smallest lot, maybe in the south end, and maybe the smallest request you have this evening, even though I don't know, I haven't surveyed all the requests you have this evening, I will keep this presentation commensurately short. Oh, okay.
I'll have to move it.
I don't know how to do the light here.
Just let me know what page you would like to.
You gave out with the last application.
How do you, is there, which buttons do you use to do the light? Is the top one the light
This
on?
really is the smallest lot.
Okay, great. So this is on the corner of Gates and Mechanic Streets. It's a very unusual, I mean, South End, everything's unusual, I guess, but there's not a lot of room on this lot. On the side that's on Gate Street, there are some hedges there, which the neighbors over in this building are very appreciative of. And there's about, depending on where you are on this little area, between like 2 and 3 feet between that and the street. There's the front of the building that goes onto Mechanic Street. And then there's the parking area. There's a very old, loud, inefficient central heating unit and furnace in the building. And the idea here is to upgrade to a heat pump, a compressor that we put on the side of the building, back as far as we can from the street, so as not to impact people's views of when they go by in front of the building. The idea is great right here is to put it right as far back here. The reason we aren't going closer to the back of the lot line is because there's a window just to the left of where we're proposing putting this, and we don't want that to get in the way of the egress of coming out of that window. That window is on the only bedroom in the property. It is a very small house. I think there's about 500 square feet inside this house. The idea is right here. Importantly, on this back lot line here that goes with 210 Gate Street, there is a 6-foot high fence. So that limits the ability of the neighbors that I have in back who I've talked to about this, and they said they're totally fine with it. There's 14 feet between the where we would be placing this compressor. By the way, the compressor is 1 foot wide, about 3 feet long, about 3 feet high. It's not a big unit, and these things are something like 4 to 5 times as efficient as what it's going to be replacing. So. Very good for the environment and global warming and all that stuff. And anyways, there's plenty of there's 14 feet here, so even with 1 foot up against the building, you still have 13 feet. So we're the only kind of variance we're looking for in terms of lot lines is 6 feet back, placing the 6 feet back from the rear of the property. That's it. I don't think there's really anything else for me to present here. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Are there any questions for Mr. Gregg? No questions.
I think he needs to present the criteria.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay. So walking through these 10.233.21 is that the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The proposed condenser will be placed in the least noticeable place on the property without encroaching on the egress from the window, and will be camouflaged by a lattice work that we'll be putting around this, that we'll be painting the same color as the building, so as to really keep it as camouflaged as possible from anyone who sees, happens to look over that area. Per the above, two media butters, I've talked to about this and both said they're verbally okay with it. Further, these heat pumps are much more efficient than what's going to be inside currently in the building. So that's that. 10.233.22. The spirit of the ordinance will be observed. Property is very unusual. The home is situated right on the property line with 210 Gate Street. There's very little space between the home and the road on Gate Street. And we have no interest in putting anything mechanical in front of the home due to curb appeal and HDC considerations. If a variance is granted to accommodate for this unusual situation with respect to the abutters, the spirit of the ordinance will be observed. 10.233.23, substantial justice will be done. Property owner wants to replace the condenser on the side of the home and the driveway as far back as is reasonably possible from the road, where it will disrupt the neighbors and the general neighborhood as little as possible on this unusual lot with immediate abutter approval. Substantial justice will be done for the owner and the neighborhood and the community in general. Much higher efficiency HVAC, lower emissions if this variance is granted. 10.233.24, the values of the surrounding property will not be diminished because the progenitor is well hidden and camouflage will not diminish the surrounding property values. And then 10.233.25, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. The proposed condenser constitutes a reasonable minor improvement to the single-family home. We have increasingly hot days during the summers, and this home does not have adequate air conditioning. To try to address the need for air conditioning, window units are typically installed, which are not attractive to look at for anyone in the neighborhood and are a real burden to install and uninstall every year. Further, this homeowner does believe it to be the right thing for the community environment in their home to be using a materially less efficient furnace than what can be achieved with a proposed heat pump installment. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, now are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone in the public, is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak to, for, or against this petition? Okay. The public hearing is closed. Mr. Mayor?
Well, I was going to ask, is this your primary residence? It's a rental.
The public hearing is closed, yeah.
Yeah, the public hearing's closed.
Oh, okay. Oh, well.
Okay, what would we like to do? Really?
Other people can make motions.
Yeah,
Mattson.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application as presented.
Okay, would anyone like to offer a second? Thank you, Mr. Mantle.
Okay, so the first criteria, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. The proposed use doesn't conflict with the explicit or implicit purpose of the ordinance, and it doesn't alter the essential character of the neighborhood, threaten public health, safety, or welfare, or otherwise injure public rights. That also addresses granting the variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance together. Number 3, 10.233.23, granting the variance would do substantial justice. The benefit to the applicant is not outweighed by any harm to the general public or to other individuals. This is just a HVAC mini split being installed, the condenser, and it'll benefit the applicant at no harm to the public. And granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties. This is a very small ask. with the lattice work to make it blend in even further without hindering the airflow is a benefit. And it's a extremely small lot where there's really not much else to put it. So for number 5, the literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship because the property has special conditions that distinguish it from other properties in the area, and owing to these special conditions, a fair and substantial relationship does not exist between the general purposes, public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property, and the proposed use is a reasonable one. The proposed use is a reasonable one. It's still just a single-family residence with improving the HVAC. The unique conditions of this property are its extremely small size and the location, the non-conforming location of the structure on the property pretty much leaves no other viable alternatives for improving the HVAC system. So with that, I'd recommend approval.
Thank you. Does the second have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Any further discussion? Yes.
I was sitting on my hands. I was really trying not to say anything on this one. On page 118 of our packet, the planning department has recommended a stipulation to address the 6-foot, 2-foot discrepancy. I don't know if you want me to introduce that as an amendment, proposed amendment, or if the maker of the motion and the second want to incorporate that into their motion.
Yes, I'll just modify my motion to state that with the following condition, that the mechanical unit is located to the side of the primary structure and is 6 feet from the rear property line as indicated in the applicant's submission materials.
Okay, thank you. Still nothing to add? Okay. Then we will vote. A yes vote allows the placement of the unit. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
Yes.
Ms. Margerson?
Yes.
Mr. Rayam?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you. Okay, the next application is for the request of Karen S. Denicola Revocable Trust, owner, for property located at 281 Cabot Street, whereas relief is needed to demolish the existing single-family dwelling and detached one-story garage/shed and construct a new single-family dwelling with attached garage, which requires the following. 1, variance from section 10.521 to allow A, 3-foot front yard setback where 5 feet is required. B, a 5-foot south side yard setback where 10 feet is required. A 3.5-foot north side yard setback where 10 feet is required. And D, a 43% building coverage where 35% is allowed. Said property is located on Assessor Map 144, Lot 20, and lies within the General Residence C District.
Good evening, Madam Chair. My name is Justin Passe. I'm a lawyer at DTC Lawyers here in town. I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, who is Karen DiNicola, who is the trustee of the Karen DiNicola Revocable Trust, which is the owner of the property. Joined also by John Shagnon from Ambit Engineering, who provided the plans, and Jeff Spitzer, who is a Chimberg Properties guy, but who's actually here tonight in his personal capacity, as he is the nephew of Karen DiNicola. So he's been part of the team from the beginning. You should have an aerial photograph of the area, the zoning map, an assessor map, a text card, a plan set from Ambit, which shows an existing conditions plan as well as a variance plan, and then some renderings and elevations from Carla Goodnight at CJ Architects, as well as some existing condition photographs. A quick procedural note, 2 things really. We noticed that the staff memo pointed out or made a recommendation that perhaps we did not need the relief from Article 3, Section 10.321 with regards to the additional building coverage. Happy to not ask for relief that we don't need, so I just wanted to raise that up front. The second related issue is the fact that we did not apply for a frontage variance because the zoning ordinance allows, under certain circumstances, for a lot to be considered conforming as to frontage if conditions exist. We worked with John Shagnon, who looked at the title to the property and who filed a supplemental letter to the board, which basically concludes that because this property, as of March 21st, 1966, had the existing amount of frontage, which is 49.86 feet. And because it was not owned in common with the adjoining properties on either side of Cabot Street, that it satisfies the criteria and we should be considered conforming as to frontage. So we did not ask for that relief, but those are the two issues at the top, I thought.
City, what do you say? Jillian?
I'll just clarify that what's in the agenda request for D, a 43% building coverage where 35% allowed, is still needed. It was the request from section 10.321 to permit the reconstruction of a single-family dwelling on that property, which is more non-conforming for building coverage, that staff did not believe was needed.
Sure, so it's definitely still applying for the building coverage variance, but not to make the property more non-conforming as to building coverage. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so may I proceed?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. So as you noted, Madam Chair, this property is situated within the GRC district, which is established to provide for single-family, two-family, and multifamily dwellings with appropriate accessory uses at moderate to high densities together with appropriate accessory uses. The property is at the southern side of Cabot Street, closer to Islington than to McDonough. It abuts to the southeast, the CD4 district, and three properties in particular along Islington, which is 303, 313, and 323 Islington Street, which are commercial buildings. I note that those buildings are larger in their massing and appear to have unimproved areas in the back, with specifically with regards to 323 Islington, which if you're on Cabot looking at our property is immediately to the right. The back side of that property is unimproved only by a driveway, which makes the appearance, I think, helpful in the context of building coverage, which is what we'll talk about. The size of the property is 3,865 square feet, about 0.89 acres. It appears smaller on average than the other lots in the area. We've defined the neighborhood as essentially Cabot Street from Islington to McDonough for the purposes of the application. One thing I'll note is that in our application, we referenced 28 Rockingham Street, which is immediately behind the property, as being unimproved. It was, as the board probably knows, unimproved for a really long time. If you look at the tax map, it still looks unimproved. But we've since corrected the error and realized that it was recently developed and sold. I think based on some of the marketing materials I saw online, it's about a 2,700 square foot house with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. So I just want to correct that for the record. I won't be referencing that property in our analysis. The neighborhood is largely residential, mostly single family, but there are a few multifamily properties in there too. As I said, to the south, the property abuts properties along Islington Street, which are larger commercial type buildings. Directly across the street at 278 Cabot, it's a boarding house, which again has a larger massing type building. The current condition of the property is a 2.5-story wood frame single family dwelling. It's got 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and about 1,300 square feet of living area. It's got a detached garage, which is kind of unique to the neighborhood. Most properties along Cabot Street in this area don't have garages, but there's a detached garage here tucked back to the back right of the lot, which is non-conforming as to setbacks. The property, the buildings in general are in poor condition, as we highlighted in our narrative. The kitchen L, the detached garage are both in bad shape. We've provided some pictures to show some of the issues with the foundations. There are sagging floors in the dwelling area, rotten windows and siding, leaking roof, etc. The property is also non-conforming for a variety of reasons. Certainly as the frontage, as we already talked about, but also non-conforming as a side yard setback on the south. It only has 2.1 feet off the garage where 10 is required. It's non-conforming as the side yard setback to the north. The dwelling currently is 0.2 feet from the boundary where 10 feet is required. It's non-conforming as to the rear yard because of the garage, where there are only 5.3 feet, where 20 feet is required. It's non-conforming as to the front yard setback, where the front steps currently encroach onto the public right-of-way, and the dwelling is located only 1.8 feet from the boundary, where 5 is required. And then it's non-conforming as to building coverage. Currently, there's 36% building coverage, where 35 is the max in the GRC district. So the proposal is to raise and remove the existing dwelling and garage and replace them with a new single-family dwelling and an attached garage. Certainly, we've provided renderings which depict what the concept and design will be. There's a garage, kitchen, dining, living, and master bedroom on the first floor, and the second floor will accommodate 3 bedrooms and 1.5 baths. We did a basic calculation of the living area that we anticipate in the new structure, which will be 2486. And if you add the garage, 240 odd square feet, it's about 2,726 square feet with the garage included. From our perspective, the most important part of the application is the fact that the net result of the project will be a property which generally conforms better with the zoning ordinance's dimensional requirements than the existing property, except for the building coverage issue. There will be approximately 270 additional square feet of building coverage on the property above what's there now. The important point in this context, we think, is that even though the building coverage is going up by 270 square feet, there's still totally compliant open space. We're at 43% open space for the lot, where 20 is required in the district. And in the context of building coverage, even though there's more building coverage, the impervious surface area on the property, which is obviously a concern, particularly in the context of stormwater runoff, is going down by 1.5%. So I think that's probably something in the public's interest, for there to be less stormwater runoff coming from the building and into the sewer, the city's stormwater infrastructure. So more conforming as to side yard setback on both sides, more conforming as to front setback. The rear setback will become totally conforming because that garage will be taken out of the back. So ultimately, in our view, the project will beautify the property, certainly add value to the property and thereby to surrounding properties as well. It was designed by Carla and her team to be consistent with the neighborhood, and certainly Jeff could speak to that more if there are questions from the board. And that is the factual presentation that we have. I'm happy to answer questions or see if John or Jeff can answer any questions, but otherwise I would be inclined to go into the variance analysis.
Go ahead.
Okay, very well. So the first and second variance criteria, which the board I know understands are essentially viewed together by virtue of the Supreme Court's view of those criteria, are that the variances will not be contrary to the public interest and spirit of the ordinance are observed. The question here really is where the variances will unduly and in a marked degree conflict with the ordinances such that they violate the ordinance's basic zoning objectives. The tests from the case law are whether or not the variances will alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the public health and safety. Here, the variances requested are really from the table of dimensional standards. The true objective there obviously is to maintain aesthetically consistent neighborhoods. The purpose of the building coverage ordinance is obviously to maintain aesthetic consistency, but also to avoid overcrowding and overmassing. So the foundational point that we'd like to make in this context is that we don't see any market conflict here, because our proposal, in our view, is more consistent with the zoning ordinance than the current conditions. Specifically, it's the same single-family use with an attached garage, which we think, with a single building rather than two distinct buildings on the property, make it more consistent with the neighborhood. We're more conforming as to side yard setback and front setback, and totally conforming as to rear yard setback. Again, as I've noticed, though greater building coverage is proposed, 43% versus the 36%, when you consider the small lot size, 3,900 square feet, we're only talking about an increase, a modest increase of 270 odd square feet. Another interesting thing here is that if you look at the other single-family properties on the east side of Cabot Street, this property actually has like uniquely large, even though it's on average smaller than the properties in that neighborhood. It's at 0.09 acres, where the average is 0.12 as we calculated it. It actually has more. It has more frontage. It's at 49.86 feet. And if you look at the other properties going towards McDonough, you're at 37, essentially 37 feet. So you've got, in the context of a neighborhood with small frontage, this is actually a significant more amount of frontage for this property, which makes the accommodation of the L off the proposed new design consistent not only with what is there now, but reasonable under the circumstances. Certainly, we would see the proposal as satisfying the case law. The renderings, I think, depict a house that was intentionally designed to be consistent with the surrounding area, and we don't discern any public health implications by virtue of the proposal of anything with less impervious coverage. The public health is benefited because of the less stormwater going into the city's infrastructure. There will be a higher value to the property, which will ultimately yield additional tax dollars, which is an additional public benefit. So on those first two criteria, we would say that the facts support the conclusion that they have been met. The third criteria is that substantial justice is done by granting the variance, and the guiding test here is whether Essentially, any loss to the individual that's not outweighed by a gain to the general public is considered an injustice, so there has to be some gain to the general public from denying the requested variance that outweighs the loss to the applicant. Here, we don't discern any real benefit to the public by denying the requested variances. The property needs to be redeveloped. Certainly, the property is currently, in its current state, more non-conforming than what we're proposing to do. Certainly, the public, we think, benefits by a property which is better aligned with the dimensional requirements. The public will benefit from additional tax revenue as well, and the public benefits in general by the reasonable use of property. The applicant also benefits by being able to redevelop and live at the property, and it's a reasonable use in our view. If the variances are denied, the property will not be able to be redeveloped as proposed. It will remain as is, which is more non-conforming than what we're proposing. So we view this application really as a win-win if the variances are granted and a lose-lose if they are denied. That is the balancing test at the heart of this third criteria, so we would suggest that criteria is satisfied. Fourth, the proposal will not diminish surrounding property values. We see that as being satisfied here. To the extent that there's, the important thing to note particularly is that the side setbacks are getting better than they are today. And that's important because when you consider the fact that we need additional relief for the building coverage, because the side setbacks are getting better, it sort of mitigates the impact caused by the building coverage, especially when you consider, as I noted at the top, that the building essentially to the south on Islington, which is 323 Islington Street, the back of that property is just a driveway, which I think, again, provides some additional mitigation to the building coverage issue. Certainly, we anticipate enhancing the neighborhood in general and the property specifically. So for that reason, we would suggest that the property value, the project will not impact negatively the surrounding properties. The last criteria is whether literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. Unnecessary hardship means that owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinances in question and their application to the property, and that the proposed use is reasonable. So there's really three tests we're talking about: whether there are special conditions, whether denying the variances will advance the purpose of the ordinance, and whether the use is reasonable. Here, we do see special conditions. As I said, the lot is actually smaller on average than the other lots in the immediate neighborhood, despite having more frontage than, as I said, those additional single-family residences on the east side of Cabot Street. It's also abutting the CD4 district in those lots I mentioned along Islington, which are 303, 313, and 323. The relevance there, I think, is the fact that those are commercial uses. The buildings are generally larger in scaling and massing along Islington Street. And with specific regard to 323 Islington, the back of that property is unimproved by a building. So to the extent that the building coverage is additional on this property, it's offset by the appearance of the back of 323 Islington. So ultimately, we view the property as being of having a unique ability to accomplish these goals in a manner that's generally more conforming to the zoning ordinance in all regards, with the exception of that building coverage issue. The second question is whether or not the purposes of the underlying ordinances are advanced by applying them to this property. We would say that they are not. Again, these variances derive from the zoning ordinance's table of dimensional requirements. The goal here is to maintain aesthetically consistent neighborhoods. The goal of the building coverage ordinance is to avoid unnecessary massing under the unique circumstances of this case, to include the surrounding circumstances of the property and the existing characteristics of this property, which are the fact that, especially on that eastern side of Cabot Street, it's got more frontage. It's already got a detached garage. So the appearance of the new structure with the L to accommodate the garage is not only consistent with the existing appearance of the property in some respects, but also reasonable under the circumstances. We would find that second test is met. And then the third and final is whether or not the proposal is reasonable. For the reasons that we've discussed tonight and laid out in our narrative, we would suggest it is. It's an improved single-family residence in a residential neighborhood. And so we would suggest that fifth and final criteria is satisfied. So happy to answer any questions if the board may have it.
Other questions?
So I have with your dispensation, Madam Chair, I just have a series of questions. So in terms of the unnecessary hardship, you point to the undeveloped lots on Islington Street as saying that your lot has a special condition. But as we saw, 28 Rockingham was improved, and there's nothing that really prevents those parts, the backs of those buildings from being developed. So, I'm struggling to find how that isn't going to happen, and also why is that a special condition with your property?
Well, so I think the argument is that the proximity to those properties are what makes it unique. Whereas if you look further north on Cabot Street, you can see very narrow residential properties with single-family residences which fill up most of the lots. What you have with this property is two things. You have a generally larger frontage of 50 feet on that eastern side of Cabot Street. You've got an existing build condition, which is the garage, which is relevant because for decades the appearance of that property has been a single-family house with a garage offset to the right. And then you have its proximity to the larger massing and scaling of the properties that I've mentioned on Islington Street. I think that's relevant because, right now that area is used as the driveway and the access to that building. I suppose that if they came in and tried to develop more of that area, additional relief would be required. But I would say that we'd rest on that analysis. It's the proximity of that and the uniqueness on the eastern side of Cabot Street with regards to the frontage, which is 13 feet, I think, or so bigger than the other properties as you go towards McDonough.
Okay. And then the next question I have is building coverage. 43%. So the general residency has the most building coverage outside of the MRB zone within the city because they're the smallest lots. They're 3,500 square feet. You're asking for something that's even more by 3% than what is allowed throughout the entire city for lot coverage. Can you address that, please?
Well, so it comes down to, I think, the reasonableness analysis.
I would say specifically, how is that not a marked, unduly, an undue conflict with the zoning ordinance, given that MRO and MRB is even less than 43%?
Well, so the language of unduly and contrary to a marked degree is pertaining to the first and second criteria.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court has said, in that context, look at whether or not the proposal is altering the essential character of the neighborhood. So we've laid out that analysis, but again, if you look at the neighborhood, you see lots which are quite small that are filled up by single-family residences on the eastern side in particular. On the other side of Cabot Road, Cabot Street, you've got a boarding house directly across the street at 278 Cabot Street, which is a larger building, and you've got multifamily as you go towards McDonough. So the question is this proposal going to alter the essential character of the neighborhood? Our view is that because we're taking a detached garage concept, attaching it to the main building, that alone makes it more consistent with the existing neighborhood itself. And then because we're taking encroachments into the setback, which exist today, and reducing them, that is in the public interest to have a lot that is in that context, a setback context, more conforming than what's there today.
So a follow-up, I think if you look at the depiction of the proposed new residence alongside Cabot Street, it is different. It does disrupt the streetscape. It is out of character with the other New Englanders down that street. I think in terms of, increasing the setbacks, if you're demolishing this building, you have plenty of room within the lot, within the building envelope, so that you probably would not need any relief from the zoning ordinance. So, why can't you reduce the structure and bring it within the building envelope, given that this lot it's 3,900 square feet, but it's about 364 square feet larger than what is allowed. So you do have room to play with there.
Yeah, I think with a 10-foot setback on either side of the rear, on either side, and a 49.86-foot frontage, you're looking at about 29 feet. If the goal is to maintain the property with a garage, which it's always had, and again, ultimately, all of this comes down to, this property is not in the HDC. We talked about ways that were to please the board. I think with the bow window on the front, it actually is pretty consistent with the other properties as you head down Cabot Street. If it was the board's pleasure to have a door on the front facade I'm sure that's something that the applicant would be willing to do potentially as a condition of approval. But otherwise, I think we sort of fall back on this idea of taking a property which is a little wonky and with two distinct buildings and this garage tucked way into the back, making it a single structure, which is actually in line with what's already on that street, and making in general all of these dimensional nonconformities better. That was the approach to the design.
Okay, I don't think that this board would dabble in design.
Yeah. And it actually sounds like it's what we're proposing at roughly 24, almost 2,500 square feet of living area actually will be consistent with what was just put up and built at 28 Rockingham, directly behind the property.
So, and my final point, Madam Chair, thank you. So we are outside of the zone, historic district. However, the zoning ordinance does protect buildings of historic or architectural interest. This is an 1870 structure in a long line of not a long line, in a line of New Englanders. So that is of concern to me in terms of this application. So, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mann.
Was there any thought to giving to rehabbing the house? Maybe taking down the back L and getting rid of the garage? I've been in the garage.
I can't answer that. I can have, certainly, if Jeff Spitzer's happy to answer that question.
Hi, good evening. Jeff Spitzer with Chinburg. I'm also would be the home builder, so we have spent some time in there examining the buildings. And the garage, for instance, is...
Got no problem with the garage.
Great.
Or the back L.
Actually, so remind me your specific question.
What is necessitating the demolition of the building as opposed to rehabbing and restoring it?
Well, it starts from the L forward, and the L itself is caving in. That's where the kitchen is and all that.
That's
rotten
the L.
floor systems. And as you come forward to the house, the foundation has some structural issues. There's some granite stones. I think there was a photo of one on the corner that are tipping in. The floor, the joists around the whole floor system, the sills and whatnot are all rotten. The roof rafters are under-framed and in some cases failing. There's some rot due to the house hasn't been well maintained over the years. The cumulative effect of all of that is putting the house at the point where it's just beyond the point in which you could save it.
And weren't all those problems found during the building inspection when this house was sold this past January?
Correct.
And they still bought the house?
Well, yeah, with the intent that we'd go through this process in order to get the variance and so forth. I did have one comment to follow up with the questions you had regarding the floor plan of the first floor and the coverage. The design, one point I would make is the design is speaking to an age-in-place option where there's a master bedroom on the suite on the first floor. And I think if you look at the first floor as a layout overall, it's a fairly modest first floor for, the use that the intent of the uses that are included there. So.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, you caught me off guard, so I'll have to get back into it. So, and you kind of touched on this a little bit already. I do think you've done a pretty good job overall with trying to continue to look at the streetscape. I will dabble in design just a little bit, a dabble, in the sense that one of our criteria is, again, the essential characteristics of the neighborhood. And so one of the letters that we have received from a nearby property owner does raise the good point. I think you talked to it a little bit, but I'm kind of not certain that it's realistic with your current plan, which is this sort of doorscape that you do see in all of the front gabled New Englanders all the way up and down the street. And really even on the opposite side of the street, you see the same effect, where there is that sort of to the left-hand side entry door. Understanding that this floor plan calls for a first floor master bedroom, which is a little odd. I think whoever buys the house would be, if it gets built, would be a little concerned at having their first floor master bedroom right in that location. But putting a door into the master bedroom there would seem to be an odd thing. So is there any thought that was given to this or how you could potentially get around that concern, if it is a legitimate concern?
So I guess three things, Mr. Rayum, and I appreciate the question. So Karen's here, and she's going to be living there if we get approved, and she'll tell you about the design that went into the master on the first floor. I think, as Jeff pointed out, it's really a functionability issue with having access to the main living areas of the first floor. But the question really points me back to the uniqueness of the property. The main entrance from the front is now on this little L area that's coming off the main living area, which can be accommodated on this lot because it is unique. It has more frontage and is wider than those other lots that go up Cabot Street, particularly the single-family residences, which can't accommodate the same thing. So it forces the entrance from the front to be on that front facade. So I think that's my first point. The second point is to accommodate that, and in an effort to make it aesthetically more consistent, as I think that that letter that you referenced noted, I think we could, as a condition of approval, accommodate it could even be a faux door. The real issue is that the existing steps went into the public right-of-way in the existing house. So obviously we couldn't propose that. But if a faux door or an architectural door that is consistent with what's there was something that would make the proposal more palatable, I think that we would have agreement on that.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'll indulge myself in just a quick comment as well. I'm appreciative that you recognize that there is a structure at 28 Rockingham Avenue. I believe it's been there for several years now. So, and as an engineering manager for over 20 years, I used to scold any engineer who would present me some work that looked like they didn't actually go out in the field and look at site conditions. So you escaped getting scolded. So that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I have to ask, is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone who would like to speak to, for, or against? I know.
Good evening, Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street and 342 Cabot. I lived on that street for 35 years, and I'm there almost every day still. I really appreciate the design that was created. What you should know is that originally that was not a garage, it was a carport when I moved in there, and every year another piece of wood was added on, and I think eventually the tax people said, wait a minute now, this is a garage. But it really was not a garage, and I think that's how they got away with the fact that they don't have any setbacks, because they just built it. As I stated in my letter, the one thing that I think is missing is that these are quintuplets, and it's missing the front door and the steps, which are really key to the character of that neighborhood. This is a new building that's mimicking an old building, and I like that. I would rather see that than some of these very modern things that are coming up. I personally don't care for the fact that you no longer can see the pocket gardens in the back, which you can see with all those other four houses as you go down the street. But I would support this if a front door was put on there, even if it was a fake one, and a set of front steps. And if she's going to move there, if she wants to be part of the neighborhood, she's going to have to sit out on those front steps, because people come out and sit with you and talk to you as you go by. And even though it is in the setback, they're moving the building back, according to their paperwork, by 3 feet, technically. So they have enough room for a set of steps there. They also are missing the thing that I don't know the name of, and therefore we would need architectural design. But the thing that goes over the doors, they did put it on. If you can flip to the other picture, please. Well, let's see if you can see the doorway. You can't see it there. They don't show it. I guess they don't show the doorway. But the doorway is actually on the side, and it actually has one of those things over it. I forgot what that's called. Yeah. But it is there, and I'd like them to move that to the front. If they want to save some money, they could move it to the front, and then she can get snowed on when she goes in, like we do at my house. I did want to mention to you the reduction in impervious surface of 1.5%. I believe, 1%, I believe, is 36 square feet. So, let's not get excited about it. So I really support this. I don't like the fact that they are not using traditional shingles, shakes, or even that fake asphalt that we have on our house on the side. I don't really appreciate the fact that that's going to do that. I do like that it's a darker color, which is all structural stuff, but we're talking about character of the neighborhood, which is number one. That's not in the character of the neighborhood. All the houses in that neighborhood have clapboards on them, or they have that artificial, what came out in the 50s, asphalt, which will make all our houses burn from the inside out when they start on fire, but like giant ovens. But anyway, so I understand how the garage got there. Everybody wants a garage. I would love to have a garage again back in our house, but that's a whole nother story. I just think some tweaking needs to be done to make it more in the character of this neighborhood. I would love to see it if you agreed to the increase in size, that you put them on as stipulations, that they become more characteristic of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak to this petition? If not, to, for, or against? If not, then the public hearing is closed. Okay. Yes.
So,
Ms. Murchison.
I will say, and I don't know the sense of the board, I will not be supporting this application. I think that the spirit and intent of the ordinance is to prevent overcrowding of the property, and this addition certainly does that. I don't find that the property has any special conditions at all. The undeveloped property on Islington Street is not a condition of this property. I believe that, they want to make it bigger, they want to have more livable space, but I don't see that they have any hardship at all. This is a bigger property than is allowed in the zone, and they're going against the highest building coverage that we have in the zoning ordinance, which is 40%, and they're going to 43%. I don't believe that we could do a stipulation as to a front door, because the representations made by the client, by the applicant, are a condition of approval, and that would change the designs here. I'm not a designer, but I think putting a door on this house or making some sort of exterior structural change to it drives some of the interior changes. So I think it would be a different application.
Anybody else? Mr. Hanson?
Yeah, I guess I'll just make a comment. I basically don't have a problem with this application and as presented, but I just don't understand why they can't build it within the envelope without why they need relief. I understand that this specific application needs relief, but it would seem feasible to me, given that the lot is a little bit bigger than the minimum required. And it's a pretty regularly shaped lot, and they even show the buildable footprint that it could be done. But at the same time, I don't have a problem with this application, so I guess that's my dilemma, yes.
Mr. Mantle?
Yeah. Been struggling with this, but when it comes down to it, I can't support this application. When I asked you about the condition and what necessitated a demolition as opposed to rehab, if you had thought, oh, we'll buy it and we'll fix it later, the proper thing would have been to take a right of first refusal and see if you could fix it before you bought the property. That would have been called due diligence. But since we're in the process of a complete demolition of the property, so you're looking at a clean slate. So you have no non-conforming property to compare it to. So I would expect your setbacks to be as close to conforming as possible. Why? Because you're dealing with a clean slate. The surrounding properties, whether or not there's open space at 323 Islington Street to give the perception that your lot coverage is not, it doesn't seem like it's that big, well, that doesn't fly. For me, your setback requests should be a lot more conforming, and your building coverage should be at the max and no more, because you're dealing with a clean slate. So I will not be supporting this application.
Anybody else? Mr. Ram?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I just would always, caution the board about, demolition of buildings. My experience with this board is we really have very little control over whether a building gets demolished or not. In this particular case, I did visit the property. I mean, I do think there's been a lot of demolition by neglect that's been going on here. I do think that it would be a difficult rehab, but regardless of that, the HDC has a lot more power to control that. I understand we can kind of say, well, it's somewhat historic. I think we're on pretty shaky ground going to do that. The city does have a demolition committee, which also reviews these types of issues. Even that has sort of a questionable legal basis behind it, but that is certainly another forum where demolition type issues outside a historic district can be addressed. So in terms of this specific project, I mean, I think it's got some good things going for it. I think it's got a couple weaknesses. I think the good things going for it are that, I do believe that some relief is certainly appropriate and actually really necessary to continue to give the feel that the neighborhood already has, which is of these, the front gables and being relatively close to the streets. We certainly wouldn't want the applicant to feel like they have to move the setback. Admittedly, it's only a 5-foot front setback, and you could probably even get that down with the averaging quotient. But we certainly wouldn't want it to be forced to be set back much further. I think that's appropriate. Each of these properties, you do see them sort of tied up against a property line. I think the applicant is improving on that for the new main building that they're sort of recreating the building that's being demolished. They're improving on it slightly, giving more room there for maintenance and other concerns for the building itself. But really, the light and air that the neighboring property sees and feels, I don't think is being changed in any substantial way. A little bit. Maybe slight improvement in that. And I don't see where we need to necessarily force. I understand it's a new build. I do want to see some improvement in it, but I don't necessarily see where you need to be 100%, especially if it starts to make it look kind of odd where it's going to be this building that's now in this center of this large lot where all these other, admittedly more narrow lotted buildings it will just look very different than that. And I think that would actually be a negative in the end. So in terms of the building being butted up against the one side, I'm okay with it. I would really be upset with the garage side being that tight if it was any higher than it is, but because it's essentially the same height as the previous garage that was there, that was apparently built by hook or by crook, but they got it there somehow. And, I again think that they're not really imposing any more lighter air to a significant degree, at least in terms of height, relative to the properties next door. I've often heard this board say, and I think I might even said it tonight, that, the conditions on the neighboring properties, they have the ability to build further up, but the current situation is such that the light and air of that property is not as negatively affected, and that is a characteristic of the property that we're looking at because of the way it's currently constructed. And again, that comes down to how is the neighborhood constructed, how is all those essential characteristics coming together. And I think the argument that those properties have that open room in the back is actually relevant to what's being discussed here. The one thing that still does bug me, and I think they're probably going a little too far, and we have seen this kind of throughout the neighborhood. There's been a number of demos and replacements between McDonough Street and some of those side streets connecting it to Islington. Is the total building coverage, I do think is probably the biggest ask that's going on here. I do like the fact that they've sort of made it look like the original house plus a new addition. I actually like the fact that it has a different siding or different visual appeal to it, so it kind of feels like an addition to an existing house, even though it is a recreation. So in that sense, I'm almost there, but I do think that they're probably asking for just a little too much house relative to the lot without enough justification to say that it's worth it. That and the issue with the door, I would agree that I would be hesitant to make that a stipulation just because it really does change a lot of factors with the applicant's design. It also changes the front setbacks because of the 18 inches high for faux steps or whatever you would need to have out there so that you can converse with your neighbors, et cetera. So I would not want to make that a condition of an approval. So I'm very close with this, but I also would tend to say that I'm falling just short, and it's really coming down to the total amount of building coverage we're looking at here.
I can try a motion. if you
Okay,
want.
go ahead. Ms. Margison.
It's hard to know exactly where the rest of the board is, but I will make a motion to deny the variance application as presented and advertised. If I get a second, I will speak to the
Okay,
reasons why.
Mr. Mantle has
Second.
seconded you.
So I will just reiterate what I said before. I think that the spirit and intent of this ordinance is to prevent overcrowding, and here we are looking at a significant building coverage, 43% versus what is the maximum allowed under the zoning ordinance, which is 35%. Unlike Mr. Rayum, I don't think that using the light and air that are provided by the properties on Islington Street, which could be developed, really cures this defect. This is a larger lot than is required by zoning, and therefore I think that 43% will even fill up that lot even more. As you can see by the aerial map, it's even with the carport or whatever it is, it's pretty tight, and you're adding another 7% of building coverage to that. So I think that it does fail the spirit and intent. And then I will say that I just don't find that this property has any unnecessary hardship for the building coverage, and also for all of these front left and right yard setbacks. I don't think that the empty parking lots on the other lots really help them in terms of hardship. I can see why they would want to do all this with this property. I understand that, but I don't feel like there's a hardship that is driving this variance request.
Any other discussion? Anything to?
I agree with everything Ms. Margison said. For me, like I said, I mean, the lot is not the smallest lot in Islington Creek. It's not the biggest, but it's a good-sized lot, and they can put a good-sized house on that. So I don't see the necessity or the hardship for all the setback relief, and especially the building coverage relief, because they're starting with a blank slate. And they can put a fine house on there and still stay as much as possible within the zoning. So that's where I'm at right now.
I'm still very torn. I mean, the relief for those side lots is very minimal. The coverage is increased. And I really applaud the fact that you tried to keep the rhythm of the street going. And I agree with Mr. Rayum that the vertical boards make us appreciate that standout replica even more. But I think I do miss that door there, which would really continue the rhythm and does change the streetscape without it. And it isn't something that we can just do as an add-on. So, and I am aware of what you're saying about the 43%. However, most of the buildings in that area probably have more coverage than that. No?
No.
It seems like they're very narrow lots with not very large backyards, so I don't know. I think it's not heard of, and it may not be what's...
I think this is a new build.
Right.
It's a new build. Yeah.
It's the new build.
Considering if you're looking at the zoning map and what is currently on this property, you have the house, you have the L behind it, and then you have that oversized garage. And all of that's going away, and it's getting bigger. And compare that to what the other buildings look on the other house. I said, I don't think anybody else except for the condo down the street, the brick building on the left-hand side, you know the one I'm talking about, that's probably well over 50%, but
I don't really need to know this, but
Yeah.
they look like they're pretty tight on their lots, and I know a new build changes it, and I think, are we ready? Yes, Mr. Rayam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to support the motion, although I don't agree with all of the points that were raised by the motion maker and the second. I think this project's a lot closer than what they do. Total building coverage, I think maybe a more convincing argument would have been to have provided the building coverage for all of the surrounding neighborhood, or a good portion of it. We have seen other applicants who come before us and made a strong argument to that effect. That, hey, look, here's the actual data. We didn't get that presented to us, which I think is hurtful as well. I remember Bernie had clearly gotten a highlighter out or hired some kid to go and highlight everything, and he was pretty good at making those pretty good arguments of, hey, look, these other lots have the same building coverage. I'm not entirely sure which way it would go. I think it could tip either way. That it could show that this would be pretty consistent, or would show it's a little bit high. My gut impression is it's a little bit high. I think it's close. I think all the other aspects for setback and whatnot, I'm comfortable with, but I will support the motion on that basis. And I do agree with the chair about the door, and I do think it's going to require some redesign by the applicant to address that concern as well. So those are my thoughts.
Is there any further discussion? Keep in mind that a yes vote denies the building. Okay. Ms. Record?
No.
Mr. Mano?
yes.
Ms. Margison?
Yes.
Mr. Rayam?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
The chair votes no. So you are denied.
Madam
Okay.
Chairman,
Yes.
I make a motion that we go past 10 o'clock.
Oh, good point. All in favor? Or we could turn back the clock.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Rayum is leaving us. He is not voting on this.
Wait for him to leave.
Make him stay.
I'm waiting for him
make
to
him
leave.
stay
Yeah,
till
what
the-
do I say?
Make him stay till the end of the meeting.
We need to go out in the lobby. And we're going to have somebody check to see if you're there.
I just want you to know that we will have 5 voting members. And you need 4 yeses.
I think after this time,
I
I'll
think-
take it.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let me read it you in. The request of Soraya M. and, oh, please forgive what I'm doing to your name, probably.
That's not me, man.
The request of Soraya and Anabe, Revocable Living Trust, owner for property located at 800 Lafayette Road. Whereas relief is needed to increase the height of the existing sign, which requires the following. 1. Variance from section 10.1281 to alter a nonconforming sign without bringing it into conformity. And 2. Variance from section 10.125 to increase the height to 20 feet and 1 inch where 20 feet is allowed. Said property is located on Assessor Map 244, Lot 5, and lies within the Gateway Corridor District and Sign District.
Good evening. My name is Peter Marsh, New Hampshire Signs, 66 Gold Ledge Avenue, Auburn, New Hampshire. There's a little bit of odd math in this, but I'm going to make the proposition quite simple. The bottom of the sign at 800 Lafayette
Can I just
Road.
ask a question? So, do you have the authorization of the owner to be here? Are you the sign designer?
I'm the sign person,
Okay, but you
yes.
have the authorization of the owner
Yes,
to
ma'am.
be here? Okay.
So the sign in question is a 48 square foot sign. It was installed some time ago, and it was permitted to be 20 foot high. In fact, it was installed lower than that, not by my company, by another. And essentially, the bottom of the sign is 12 foot 7 high. Problem is that most on-the-road traffic is 13'6". So what happens is the sign is consistently hit. It's been hit, in my estimation, several times in the last year.
It's the gas prices.
Yeah, I think that was something like that.
They're mad.
So the reason it's hit is because it sits on an island and it overhangs the car park by about 2.6 feet. And as I say, vehicles drive under it and unwittingly hit it. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to add a plug into it, and we'd like to raise the bottom of the sign to 14'1". Why would we like to do 14'1"? I'm not sure about the one. I know the 14 foot is because there's a small curb under it, which accumulates ice during the winter. And as vehicles pass under the sign, quite often they get lifted up and drive higher than the 13'6". The other problem that gas stations face uniquely to them is you get a lot of builders and roofers driving around their 13'6" trucks with ladders on top of them. So hopefully if we raise it to 14 feet, we'll negate that problem. So it's a pretty simple raise. So the variance, the two variances are one to raise it to 10'1", which again is a minimal one. And then obviously because it's non-conforming, we have to ask for a variance to adjust a non-conforming sign. And it's non-conforming because of the setbacks. So to the points of the variance, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. The requested changes are minimal enough the public would not even notice the increase in height. Again, it overhangs the station side of the Big Apple property. Big Apple is a convenience store that is C.N. Brown from Maine property, and they lease this property from the owner. The consequence of the location of the gas island is that vehicles drive under it the whole time, and this is the reason that it's hit. It would be counterproductive to locate it. There's really no good place on this property to locate it, to relocate it. And if we relocated it to the side on the circle side, which I guess is the west side, you'd really get most of the same setback issues. To the second point, the proposed use will observe the spirit of the ordinance. The purpose of the sign code, among others, is to protect the public from hazardous displays. Certainly raising it to prevent vehicles hitting it will reduce hazards to the general public and obviously the sign itself. Substantial justice would be done to the property owner. The sign's on an island, and this really is the only logical place for it, as I said. Moving the sign away from the road would be subject to the same setback issues and would attract considerable cost with no real benefit. Leaving it where it is and raising it up so that the bottom of the sign is 14'1" is a logical way of getting over this problem. The proposed use will not diminish the value of surrounding properties. It's not really going to affect anything, either positively or negatively. Visual enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. Well, this property has some special conditions. Firstly, gas stations need price signs. It's a de facto need for gas stations to advertise prices. So it's an essential element of a gas station. The site has no other suitable place for the sign. Traffic enters the site and passes under the sign as a result of this. So continuing with the sign as it is will subject motorists to unnecessary danger from the sign at its current height. And it makes sense to raise it so the bottom of the sign is 14'1" above the roadway. The sign we're proposing is exactly the same sign as the old sign. We would like to reuse it. We may not be able to because it's been hit so much, but this is a standard Citgo sign. If the structure is good, we'll use it, but if not, we'll get exactly the same sign from Citgo, and it'll go in exactly the same place. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions? Other than why, oh, why?
My question is Wicked Joe's Subs and Grubs not going to be part of the gas station going forward?
I guess not.
They're out of the new sign.
I guess not.
Okay.
That was-
Just curious.
Are there any-
Lost to
yes.
clearly a loss to
I
the
never knew they
community.
were
but-
there.
I've never been there, but
What's triggering this now? Was it hit again recently, or is
Yes, it was hit, sometime in the winter we had it hit, and we repaired it again. So it's just being hit the whole time.
Okay.
And I think we've taken on the repair of the sign. I think we've done it twice in the last 18 months, something like that. I think the owner said enough.
That's, oh, no. Okay, if there are no further questions, then thank you.
Thank you.
Or is there anyone in the public who would like to speak to, for, or against this petition? I'm shortening it. To, for, or against. Public hearing's closed. I have to do it. Okay, who would like to make a motion?
No?
what about you, Jody?
Oh, no, not yet.
Not yet. Go, Jeff, you can tie for the lead.
all right, I'll make a motion to approve the application as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. I'll take 10.233.21 and 22 together. So granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest, and granting the variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance. The proposed use must not conflict with the explicit or implicit purpose of the ordinance, and must not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, threaten public health, safety, or welfare, or otherwise injure public rights. And in this case, it's the exact same sign and the exact same use, just improving the public health, safety, and welfare. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. The benefit to the applicant is not outweighed by any harm to the general public, to other individuals, and in fact, this will clearly benefit the applicant with no detriment to anyone else. The next criteria is granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties. There's no reason to believe that this small modification to the sign would diminish surrounding property values. And finally, the literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. The property has special conditions that distinguish it from other properties in the area, and owing to these special conditions, a fair and substantial relationship does not exist between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property, and the proposed use is a reasonable one. The proposed use will stay the same, and it's a reasonable use. And the unique conditions of this property are that this small island area where the sign has been located and can be is one of the few places on the property, and being a gas station, it as stated, a sign is a pretty critical feature for stating gas prices, and that's a unique condition to this property compared to the surrounding properties.
Anything to add?
This is an easy ask. This is a perfect example of what should have been an administrative approval. Over
It really
1
is a little
inch.
stem.
1
In
inch.
any case, here we are, and I'm going to call for the vote. Okay, yes means the sign goes in. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Ms. Margerson?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. I am so sorry you had to wait all night for this.
So sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, motion to
Yes.
adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Did you notice that the house had no living?